You ready?
Yes, sir.
So this video right here is the Anthony Browder and Rock Newman show video right here. This is the guy, he's an Egyptologist. He does a lot of explanations and a lot of excursions to Egypt, tours, taking people back and forth, studying the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and culture and religious practice at the time. He calls himself a cultural memory specialist. And so what he believes he's been commissioned to do by whoever is a higher power or himself, however he figures it out, is to maintain the memory of certain cultures, to inspire and to instill power, to empower the people that come from that certain culture. So that's what he's talking about, Rock Newman right here, and we're going to get into it.
December the 25th. So we have within the story of the founding Paris of ancient Kemet, Osiris and Haru, the fundamental story that would later be incorporated into the Bible as a story of Jesus. And there are numerous parallels that, again, any person who is questioning what I'm saying, if they were to have a conversation with any trained priest or rabbi or bishop, someone who's going to divinity school, they know this story. And that is also the reason why you'll find this same symbol that looks like the Washington Monument. It was known originally as a tekken. We know it better by its Greek name, obelisk. They will find a tekken in the center of St. Peter's Square. So you have to ask the question, what is this African symbol of resurrection doing in the center of the Vatican? And why is it that every Easter Sunday, when the Pope stands on his balcony and delivers his sermon about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, there are 150,000 people standing in St. Peter's Square surrounding that tekken, that oldest symbol of resurrection, and every Pope knows that story. So it begs the issue that not only do people of African ancestry need to have their memories restored, but people of all nations need to know the greater truth of an African story that has been hidden from most people on this planet.
In 1990,
I do want to say this part really quick before we get into it, is that, and I think Dane mentioned this on his podcast yesterday, we was talking, people confuse begging the question with raising the question. Oftentimes you see on the news, see it in movies, when they say this, which begs the question. But begging the question is it's a logical fallacy. It's when you assume your conclusion, when you're trying to prove it. So you're using your conclusion to prove your conclusion, which is circular reasoning, which is begging the question. Which is opposed to raising the question is when an idea or something hits your mind and makes you think of certain questions. You'd be like, that raises this question. So when he says begging, it's become so much a part of the culture that it's pretty much changed the definition. Begging the question kind of does mean raising the question now, in popular parlance at this point. But yeah, I just want to make that point because this is a show about logic and reason. I want the audience to understand begging the question is something you need to learn. So you make sure you're not in violation of it.
I thought about that. I thought about that when he said something about begging the idea or whatever. I thought about that too. But yeah, that's become, like you said, so much a part of the common parlance today. It's like when people call me at 54 years old, like people your age probably call me a boomer. And I'm like, I'm not a boomer. That was my mama. You know what I'm saying? But it just gets picked up so much in the language that people just keep doing it.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we got anything on that for that one right there?
Yeah,
we missed part of the context of what he was talking about.
Yeah, I think I did too. I was trying to follow it, but I didn't get the general
probably
point.
should have started a little bit further back. But you got anything on that?
Yeah, no. I would just remember the timestamps. He was saying that Haru was born on December 25th, and he went on to that.
Okay. So the Haru, anybody got anything on So yeah, he didn't say that in his video, but that probably should have been a part of it. What timestamp are we at right now?
We had timestamp right now. We had timestamp beg the question at 1825. Beg the issue.
Yeah, I was just talking about the number. But yeah, okay. So can we start at like 17 or when because it's like a series of we're all close together.
Yeah.
Whatever that timestamp is, that kind of gets all of that.
Let's start from 7. Yeah, that's something.
Founding Paris of ancient Kemet, Osiris and Haru, the fundamental story that would later be incorporated.
Because we left off when we was talking to Will.
And then 9 months later, the Virgin of Set.
The last episode when we was talking to Will, we left off when he said that the Virgin Mary was done before. So that's the timestamp before this one. So we start right here at 1715. Haru was born on December 15th.
Founding Paris of ancient Kemet, Osiris and Haru, the fundamental story that would later be incorporated into the Bible as the story of Jesus. And there are numerous parallels that, again, any person who is questioning what I'm saying, if they were to have a conversation with any trained priest or rabbi or bishop, someone who's going to divinity school, they know this story. And that is also the reason why you'll find the same symbol that looks like the Washington Monument. It was known originally as a tekken. We know it better by its Greek name, obelisk. They will find a tekken in the center of St. Peter's Square. So you have to ask the question, what is this African symbol of resurrection doing in the center of the Vatican? And why is it that every Easter Sunday, when the Pope stands on his balcony and delivers his sermon about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, there are 150,000 people standing in St. Peter's Square surrounding that tekken, that oldest symbol of resurrection, and every Pope knows that story. So it begs the issue that not only do people of African ancestry need to have their memories restored, but people of all nations need to know the greater truth of an African story that has been hidden from most people on this planet.
In 1993, I think it was, I was at the Vatican, and they took us on a tour. And
So that's the end of that time stamp. Any of y'all fellas got anything on that before we go to the next one?
I think I got a little something on there.
So just to add some order, I guess we can just go in order. I guess T-Reason, you can kick it off, and then Dane, and then myself.
I think that's pretty interesting. I think that there are stories like that, and obviously, you can't deny the images we saw. We saw that same structure in multiple places, and is a deep-rooted story that
tell us about the Black Madonna.
People that are involved all know the story. So there is something there. I think we need to understand the history more. I think that's very important to know the facts and understand the history of all of these types of topics. I think the story could have a lot of truth to it. But it's new information to me. I've never heard that before. So I would like to explore it a little bit more and do my own research on that to find out, how much truth is in that statement. So
okay. All right. They got anything?
Well, I'm not sure what his overarching point is, other than to say that there's pagan artwork and, monuments and stuff like that that's in the Vatican, and it's all across Europe. I mean, that's the Washington Monument. If you go to a graveyard that has Masons buried in it, and I don't mean people who do brickwork, I mean the Masonic Lodge, their graves would often be marked with an obelisk as well. So, I mean, that's true.
Let me chime in, because you say you're not sure where he's going. To give more context, he's saying that the structures predates Jesus or the Bible. Some of these structures that Christianity might borrow. I'm not Christianity,
Yeah.
Catholicism.
Yeah. That's not even
a lot of these statues predates what we see in the Bible.
That's true. That's not even a historical question as far as that goes. When Constantine was converted to Christianity, a lot of my Catholic brothers might say, that's just how them Protestants thought. But when he was converted, he issued an edict that his subjects were to also convert. So there was a lot of pagans that came into the church, not because they had some sort of experience with Christ and repented, that sort of stuff, but because they didn't want to be killed. Keep in mind that Rome ruled Egypt and places there in North Africa and that sort of stuff, that sort of thing. There was, the whole Mark Antony, Cleopatra thing going on too. So a lot of that paganism, sure, it came into the church. That's not even I see on social media all the time, people talk about hidden history, and I like responding to those posts and ask them when the last time they went to a library and what's the last 3 books they read. It's not hidden. It's just nobody's Uber eating it to your house.
Exactly.
But it's not hidden. If you want to read a book, you ain't even got to read it. I do Audible like you wouldn't believe. I listen to an audio book 5 or 6 times riding in the road, man. It's not hidden. It sounds like he's presenting it as some sort of a hidden, he says about reminded of their memories. I don't even know what that means. That sounds to me like woman poetry. Like, you just interpret it how you want. During Mr. Trump's first 2 elections, which I didn't vote for in the first 2 times, he, I was explaining to my fellow conservatives that thought he was some sort of, he was Moses to them or something and everything. And I would try to explain to them that he uses words and phrases that he doesn't define. And that leaves the public to define it however they want. And the average person is going to think he intends that phrase in the way that they think of it. And that's on the right and the left, you know, and then they think, yeah, you know, Mr. Trump agrees with me and we're on the same side, but Trump hadn't really actually said what he meant by that. And so that's kind of like this guy in the video. He's like, they need to be reminded of their memories. What does that even mean? I mean, do I have amnesia? I don't know.
Interesting point. Let me bring Vulcan in there. And you do see a lot of that, a lot of those statements, people in the conscious community, they do bring that up as far as being reminded of what your ancestors did as ways to tap into that, quote unquote, spiritually. And just for context, I just forgot my thought, but I'm gonna bring Vulcan in here. Go ahead.
Now, and I'll just say this: you don't have to say I'm gonna bring Vulcan in if you're gonna make your point. You can just say your point, and at the end, just give it to me, because I don't want that to be a reason why you might forget what you're trying to say.
Okay.
Because you'd be like, you start talking like I'm gonna bring Vulcan, and then I'm like, okay, you might lose your train of thought. But going into it, so my thoughts on it was this, and it's hard to find. This one's gonna be just.
I just remember
go ahead.
One of his strongest points that you see this in his teachings, that Egypt has significant influence on the West. That's one of the his roots of a lot of his teachings. So that's why he was showing the similarities a lot of cultures adopting some of the artwork and statues that was in Egypt. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so my thought process on this one's gonna be a little janky, because I think whatever would have made the context crystal clear to us was before where we started the timestamp. That's my opinion about it. But just off what he's talking about, I guess for me, I don't see the relevance. It's a truism, you know, I think similar to what Dane is saying, to say that these monuments and the symbols outdate, you know, Christianity. That's fine. You know, there's nothing a part of Christianity's claim that said it had to be everything that's a part of it, all the paraphernalia and art has to be first. Some would even find that stuff insignificant, especially in regards to the Roman Catholic Church. You know, some people are Eastern Orthodox. There's a large percentage of people who are Protestant. So a lot of that stuff, the imagery, you know, the metaphor, all that kind of stuff, and the tradition that you see in the Roman Catholic services, I wouldn't even really subscribe to that stuff. Some of that stuff I would consider even heretical at certain points. So I think that's part of it. Is there's a cultural Christianity. You hear Richard Dawkins call himself a cultural Christian. There's this cultural Christianity. And a lot of these guys who are disagreeing with Christianese, I agree with them in doing so. I think that we need to get a lot of that out, whether it's, y'all hear anything in my background? Okay, good. Well, yeah, so a lot of that, you know, people, you know, whether it's people saying Satan attacks you in hell or something like that, it's not in the Bible. That's something that's been just, you know, perpetrated throughout the different churches, and people. I've ever had pastors that would pass out books that say divine revelation of hell, or talk about how demons are torturing you in hell. And, you know, I remember I brought up one time, I was like, where does the Bible say that? Hey, James, go over there with that. He wasn't trying to hear, because he had his doctrine. He wanted to maintain that. So, you know, there's a lot of, you know, Adam ate the apple instead of Adam ate the fruit. There's all these types of things that maybe sometimes were harmless. It was given to kids so they can understand it. And it just kind of, most of us, to Dane's point, we don't Uber eat knowledge and information. So what happens after you get a certain age, you don't got to go to Sunday school anymore. You're just making your casual observations as an armchair, you know, philosopher about the stuff you're saying. You know, what happens is you tend to think things are Christian that are not Christian. They're just things that Christians hold to or do as a part of their culture specifically. And I think that's a lot of times what you're going to see him critique. And then if you already have a certain lens that white people are trying to lay claim to things that don't belong to them, or they didn't own, they stole without giving the credit, then that's what you're looking for. That's the things you're looking for. Well, this really came from us. And so now, but how much of that is relevant to the Christian? Most of us don't really care. It's not a salvation issue. It's not even a secondary issue for us. It's, you know, people who care about history may care about that thing, but I don't think it has any tangible, meaningful difference in the everyday lives of people, especially Christians.
For guide, could he allow me to see the Black Madonna?
Mhm.
I thought he was going to have a heart attack. Tell us about the Black Madonna.
Well, the Black Madonna, there are several Black Madonnas. Pope John Paul II is from Poland, Czeskokowa. And in Czeskokowa, they have a shrine of the Black Madonna. So every time the Pope went home, he would go and pray at the feet of the Black Madonna. The Black Madonna is the Greek version of Isis and Horus, which is the Europeanized version of Haru and Set. So this story that I told earlier about Asar, Set, and Haru, and the virgin Set being impregnated by the spirit of her husband Asar, and Set giving birth to Haru on December the 25th. So if we follow that narrative, Set was forced to flee for her life because the king of Kemet, Egypt at that time, Set, was looking to kill the sun. And so Set and her son literally hid in the bulrushes. And I could take you to temples in Egypt and show you these images. And so she was Set and Haru were worshipped by the Greeks as the Black Madonna and Child. And then it was later, much later, that Eusebius took these ancient stories, took these ancient myths, and that's the essence of it. This story is mythology. It is not a historical fact, but it is a myth that is used to imbue people with a certain level of understanding so that they can relate to things beyond the physical. And so it was Eusebius who grafted these stories into the new narrative that they were creating in order to control the people physically, mentally, and spiritually.
You use the term myth.
Yes, sir.
Would you then suggest that the birth of Christ in the manger,
Can you pause
the
it?
Holy Trinity,
Because it
is a
seems like a
myth?
different topic.
Yeah, I was going to deal with the myth and the Black Madonna, but we could stop with the.
Oh no, sorry. Go ahead. If you got it, you go ahead. Go ahead.
All right.
have
No, let's
thoughts.
address that. Let's address that because that's a 2-minute segment. What's your thoughts as far as the Black Madonna?
Theories and Dane, and then myself, just so you can remember the order.
Yeah, start with start with 2 reasons.
Yeah, so I'm just listening to what he's saying. I think a lot of this stuff is pretty interesting because the way that I see it is he's trying to correct history as we know it. I think he's trying to get something out into the mainstream that's not a part of the mainstream. I think that this is something that dates back, predating what we know to be the start point. So I think that that's what he's trying to say is like, well, we thought that this is where it originated, but the actual origin, he's talking about the origin. So what he's trying to show us is an origin of a story that got taken and reused and repackaged to what we now know to be today as mainstream information. And I think that people like that are very important as long as they're doing it historically correct. So that's why he keeps giving credibility to what he's saying by saying you can go and see these on the temple walls. So I'm very intrigued by what he's saying. I'm interested to hear more. And I think that he's actually giving us some information that's useful and vital to history, culture, Christianity, and all of these things. I think it's very important. I think it's good information.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. That's when he said the Black Madonna is the Greek version of Isis. Isis, he's saying that's the original story. Let's go get Vulcan.
Yeah, so for me, I definitely see where there could be a need for this in the textbooks, historical textbooks. I have certain issues with this though, but Dr. Anthony Browder is one, this is not his field of expertise. His degree is not in this particular field. That doesn't make what he's saying not true. But what it means is that we're not aware if he knows the methodologies you would use to be able to do history the right way. And we saw this, bear out to some extent when Billy Carson got into it with Huff. Billy Carson, similar to Anthony Browder, makes those trips to Egypt and has a lot of theories and said he reads different things, all that kind of stuff. Do we even know if Anthony Browder can read these hieroglyphics? We don't know. And the thing is that, so we just assume because somebody is talking about it, they're going all the time, that they've done all that kind of due diligence. But a lot with Billy Carson's situation, we learned he doesn't even know how, he hasn't been classically trained as a historian. So therefore, he's not even able to properly vet his own methodology to weed out his biases and stuff like that. And I think Anthony Browder is guilty of the same thing from what I've observed from him in the past and even in this conversation. Because for one, I think his whole thing is to tear down Christianity. And I think he's using Egypt because a lot of us don't know that much about it other than the little that we hear, the here and there. But we don't know if it's first or not. There's some people might say, Babylon was first. Some people, there's other places that people might say was first. And first doesn't matter. Like, just to quickly address the first thing for me, as I see it, is that if you believe in Adam and Eve, whether you believe it from a scientific standpoint, religious standpoint, even scientists hold to, even scientists that aren't necessarily Christian hold to like a mitochondria Eve. So if you hold to that type of belief system, people will say, well, Jews or Christians got it from these other people because they were first, or when we date their writings or whatever, we say this came before that. But to me, that's not inconsistent with the Christian or the Jewish belief system, because of the fact of the matter, Adam and Eve would have passed on stories to their children. And as these people spread out and spread out and spread out, and they pass it down, or even Noah, however you want to do it, these kids are going to end up in different regions. It's going to be a telephone game to some extent, because they're going to have certain versions of the story similar to how their great grandparents told them. It's going to diverge at some points. The flood stories, whatever it is, there's going to be slight variations to it. So it's not about dating one. It's, oh, this one came first, so they borrowed from another one. It's just saying that maybe the oldest and the middle child and the younger child may have slightly different versions of the stories they heard from great grandpa Adam and great grandma Eve. And so that's what you're going to see. So you're going to see those parallels because they're echoing a story that they all were told by their ancestors. So that's, for me, is why I don't think a lot of this who came first, all that kind of stuff. Another thing about history is that it changes. It's a soft science. It doesn't give you the same absolute proof that you might find in mathematics or logic. And that being the case, I get messages all the time that said, we thought this at this time, and now they find out that wasn't true, or and so these things change all the time. And so when these guys are attacking the Christian faith based off of what they're claiming they found, is not even trained historians or trained archaeologists, whatever they claim that they're dabbling in, to me, it's just to mislead the people and to make as a money grab. They already have an angle they want to play. They already have a demographic that they want to get their money, and so that's what they're doing.
I guess my question is, when something's not first or the original, is it fair to question the legitimacy of the story? That if a story is borrowing for another story, like this is the story we presented, right? Okay, y'all copied from this story, so it's okay to be skeptical of this story that's been presented to me. That's my question.
It's a question of who?
To you. You just got speaking about. So to you, it's to you.
Okay, I don't mind answering it. So, I mean, the thing about being skeptical is there's a science to healthy skepticism. You heard, even said here earlier, T. Reason said a question that was asked wasn't a good question, or wasn't a fair question, or was an absurd question. So people do believe that there are questions that aren't good questions to be asked. And so some questions can be stupid if there's an internal inconsistency in it, if it's begging the question, if it's, there's certain assumptions that are yet to be proven in the question. And so some people just think that they're being skeptical is a virtue, and that's more like a paranoia, because you got to have a system that, epistemology is a study of how do we know what we know. How is this question going to advance the conversation? And so going into the first thing, why does first matter? What are you trying to prove by stating this came first? Do you know it's first? Do you have faith it's first? All this stuff's going to matter. So when somebody makes their claim that this borrowed from that because this came first, you still have to establish that it was borrowed. Just first doesn't equal borrowed from. And so when people are saying these things online, people have to ask the academic question, have to ask the obvious question that's raised, that's logical, but the valid question, grounded in, and by valid, I mean grounded in reason. A lot of people, we use valid for all kinds of things. Feelings are valid, or we use feelings for all kinds of things, but valid means grounded in reason. It doesn't mean something's always true. It just means that its conclusion is followed logically by the premises. Mm. And so I just want to, so in the closing, I'm just saying that you can ask questions, but you also got to question your own sense of skepticism.
Yeah, I was just
going to chime in before the next segment, because you didn't get a chance to chime in.
Yeah, well, I was just going to just interject on what Vulcan was saying about, logic and being able to prove it too. Also, it's true that just because you can mount a successful logical argument to prove a point, still don't mean your point is true. It just means that your opponent was not able to refute your argument, you see, and that sort of stuff, because we could both be wrong. That's the truth. But but you're right about trying to disprove scripture and that sort of stuff, there's all sorts of claims. Like some people believe that because there's a lot of overlap between Hinduism and Christianity. So I've heard the argument before that during Jesus' 40 days, in the wilderness, that he traveled down into India, picked up on, because Hinduism is much older than Christianity, came back, incorporated that into his teachings, that sort of stuff. I think one of the biggest lies that you can, that gets taught by people in church is don't ever argue with God and don't ever question God. Moses argued with God. Jacob argued with God. I believe that God wants us to engage with him. In scripture, God says, test me and see if I won't pour out a blessing on you that you can't even receive. Try me, hold me to my word, that sort of stuff. And so I think that's really a disservice when preachers preach that, and as far as the teaching, what I'm about to say doesn't mean that what I argue is true, but my BA is actually in theology. And when I went to college to earn my degree, man, that's probably the biggest faith questions or crisis I got into when I began to learn church history, the history of that region of the world, the different pagan religions and the different influences and biblical translations and stuff. You really get to reading that stuff, and because it's stuff that's not commonly knowledgeable, and if people don't even know to go look for it, they're not going to go look for it, and that sort of stuff. But you really kind of toss it around. So what I tell people is, question all of that stuff. Go to the library, research it, dig into it, because ultimately it comes back to, is Christ true? And if Christ is true, and you go hunting the truth, I'm talking about with an open mind, not trying to defend yourself or your family or your thoughts or ideas, and you just move forward on it, then you're ultimately going to come back to Jesus. It might take a month, a year, 10 years. But if you're really searching for truth, you're going to come right back around to Christ because he's true.
Okay, let's get into the comments. I'm not sure if anyone is still in the chat, but what Mr. Browder is saying has two parts: the Egyptian mythology and what it means when we find that mythology represented in Catholicism.
That's my baby in there chatting.
Okay. The conclusion that Browder seems to be saying that Christianity is just a newer version of the myth that was borrowed, copied from the Egyptian mythology. However, I think this is flawed. This is a flawed conclusion. Oh, this is somebody. Okay, shout out. She mentioned you earlier when you and Teresa was going back and forth. She said, should I leak the YouTube video of your cop, of the cop encounter with Dave? I was talking about what Teresa said, talking about the cop situation.
Yeah, and me and that woman been together since she was 17. I was 18 years old. What she's talking about is one time I had a police encounter in a Walmart parking lot that lasted about an hour. And everything. They eventually gave me my pistol back. I got back in my car and left. Before it was over with, the cop that I called his buddies over there for backup, I was trying to engage with him, and I was in the car. He was standing outside the car. His supervisor and other two. It was just a bull crap. And finally, he wouldn't even look at me, but he said, Mr. Snyder, I think from now on that it'd be good if we just didn't talk to each other anymore. So you know what I did, right? I kept talking. Just like, I'm like, well, you the one threatened to tase me and everything, and you got me out of the car.
Don't let tase. We got to talk about that in another episode. All right, let's get to the next segment, Jesus a Myth. Let's get into it, y'all.
Full of people physically, mentally, and spiritually.
You use the term myth.
Yes, sir.
Would you then suggest that the birth of Christ in the manger and the Holy Trinity is a myth also?
Rock, you're going to get me in trouble.
Okay. That's what we do.
But let me say this. I remember in 1981 reading John Jackson's book, The Introduction to African Civilization. And John Jackson was a brilliant human being. He probably had a photographic memory, a brilliant scholar. And in his book, Introduction to African Civilization, he talks about the Christ myth. Now, there's a book called 101 Myths of the Bible. There's a book by Kersey Graves called 16 Crucified Saviors. And in this book, we find that there are 16 historical personalities that grew out of myths about 16 personalities who also were the product of a virgin birth, who also were born on December the 25th, who also were symbolically crucified. So what you see in this narrative is that myths are powerful tools that may not necessarily be true, but they have truth in them. And so it's a means of telling a historical narrative across time and space such that everybody can relate to it. So in that context.
All right. Therese, is there any thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm looking at it through a different lens now because of some of the information that Vulcan was divulging, because I don't know much about this guy. I don't know what his credentials are. I don't know what his angle is. I don't know if he's just a historian that's trying to bring accurate information or if he's trying to create confusion. I don't personally know. So now, I'm kind of listening to what he's saying, but I don't have a definitive stance on whether I agree or disagree with what he's saying. I'm just listening to what he's saying.
All right, Dane, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, I think that he's failed to show that just because these other stories existed in previous cultures, that it follows. I think it's committing a non sequitur. I don't believe that it follows that means that the stories of Scripture are myths. If that's the argument he's making, then I don't think just because it happened before, the story of Gilgamesh has a big flood in it that predates Scripture, but that doesn't mean that the Noahic flood was a myth. Often I've had non-believers argue with me that, every culture on the planet has a flood story. So, the Jews were just one of them. And my thing is, sounds like that would more support the claims of Scripture than refute it. If all of these unrelated, so to speak, cultures around the globe have a story of a deluge flood, seems like that would lean more towards the Bible. But instead they use it to say, well, that just means that it was just a common myth that was made up. And I just don't think he's made his argument.
Okay. Welcome.
Yeah, I was really curious what he was going to say. I was curious if he was, because it sounded like he was going to say something else about what his point was, or tie it all interconnected. So I was a little curious about that.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah, just like a couple more seconds of it.
Context. If you like, I could break time and space such that everybody can relate to it. So in that context, if you like, I could break down the mythological elements of the story of the birth of Jesus Christ. And it's all based on historical facts and astronomical facts.
I'll tell you something. As the foundation of Christianity,
yes,
I'd like you to take a stab at your thought.
Yeah, I remember when I did that time, so that's why. Because
I think that was the tie-in that he's tying it all together right there. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, when he's saying this, I think Dane said it, really well. The reality is that he hasn't tied any of this stuff together. He's talking about, I do agree with his breakdown of mythology. That is true. Mythology is meant to communicate certain, themes that are important to human existence across time and space. And that's important for us. Just like we watch Disney movies with Bambi and all that kind of stuff as kids. And I still think about Bambi to this day. When I first got on the basketball court in my early 30s and I haven't played in a while, I remember my friends was like, you look like Bambi out there with your legs. My legs were just going like a little, noodle legs when Bambi first came out the womb. And that was funny. And he never forgot that. And he was in his late 20s at the time. So the mythology is helpful in that way. But when it comes to the Bible, again, that there's no proven case that it's been stolen or borrowed. I think what happens, some people call it like a parallelomania, where they'll, where they talk about how certain themes were borrowed, and what they're doing is they'll just make the language Christian. So they might call it a terminology fallacy. They'll say Osiris, whoever it was baptized. What they mean is that after, the brother of the father had a fight, and then the father died, who's the king or whatever it is, his body was thrown into the Nile River, and she discovered the pieces, and they'll call that, bandaging up, put them in the Nile River. They call it a baptism. Now, did the Egyptians call it a baptism? No, but they're using Christianese so that it'll make the parallel in our minds, because they said the same thing. But that's a far cry from what Christians would consider a baptism. They'll talk about how, one impregnated the other, and it was a virgin, but she had a husband. There's no proof that she was a virgin, and and that's when it gets into the audience out there understanding how to do history to some extent. We're not going to get into some kind of extensive class because I couldn't teach it anyway. One thing I can say is, one thing you want to add to your vocabulary is primary source material. A lot of times we learn stuff online and we're going off what somebody said about something else that they heard, instead of going, okay, like what documents are they using? Is it some kind of hieroglyphic? What does a hieroglyphic say? You can, with technology now, you can actually go to the Smithsonian or online or whatever, and it'll translate it for you. Now that takes some reading. We don't have time to do all of that. In the Bible, it says that in studying books, there is no end, and increasing knowledge increases sorrow. So there's a certain extent to where we don't have time to look at all this kind of stuff. And guys like this play on that. They know you don't have time to look into that stuff. You're not gonna remember even the terms he used, most likely, once you're in a position to actually look at some of this stuff. But that's why it's important for you to learn how to decipher what's true from what's false by learning how to think critically. Some of this stuff you don't got to study the history to know it doesn't make sense. They mentioned the non sequitur. Something could make sense and be off topic. You could be chasing a red herring, and then you go back and ask yourself the question, hold on, why am I focused on this again? What does that have to do with the original topic? Even if this part is true, how does that prove that Jews or Christians borrowed from them? That'd be the question. And so when you're listening to guys like this, I'm going to be listening. What is the evidence of that? You can dazzle me with a bunch of random facts. Anybody who can memorize stuff can memorize random facts about history and geography. But now, how do you substantiate your claim? And that's where a lot of these types of guys and even ourselves can fall short at times.
Another thing to ask guys when you're dealing with someone like that is, what's their end motivation? Like, for instance, are they selling books? Are they selling a coaching course? Are they selling something like that? Because a lot of times they'll come across like there's some sort of a guru to draw people in, and then once they get in, then there's some ulterior motive. Unfortunately, there's guys like Jim Jones and David Koresh and that sort of stuff that really went down that road. But that's a question, like, do they have an ulterior motive for presenting this as some sort of truth, as some open-ended claims? And like I said a minute ago, where then the listener fills in the blanks and the gaps to say things that they have not actually proven to be logically true, so you can sell them your books or your Sunday school program or your whatever. That's always follow the money a lot of times in situations like that.
Yeah, I want to have, before we get back to the video, as far as for the audience, to when Vulcan said something about, when he said primary sources, and just to elaborate on that, primary sources, just to define it more, give examples of people that have written about the time and event during that time, and what else? Maybe people and witnesses during that time that actually witnessed what was going on. A lot of times when you see when people are quoting history, they are quoting somebody copying or writing about somebody else writing about something. And it's not the primary source as far as the person that was actually there doing.
And all that stuff is helpful, but you need to know how to categorize it in your mind. That's you synthesize it properly. And I think that's part of the issue. All of it's good. Hearing people take creative license on their interpretation of historical situations, that's beautiful. That's fun. But know that that's what it is. It's an interpretation. It's not what it actually said. A classic example was the devil. People look at the horns and the red. That was a Black comedian who started that type of depiction of Satan. And so somebody might say, why would he have the horns? And you're thinking in my head, yeah, why would he have horns? You don't even realize you're over here critiquing some comedian's rendition of it. It has nothing to do with Christianity itself. So just ask those questions. Dr. William Lane Craig, my favorite scholar, always says the job of the philosopher is to discover the assumptions and commonly held beliefs. And so I think that's something that we would do well to remember. We continue,
thoughts on just that.
Well, and
do that breakdown.
And let me put this in context, because I was born and raised in Chicago. I grew up in a Christian household. My grandmother was probably the most religious person I ever met in my life. She took me to church, and every time I went to church, I would ask questions. Yeah. Why don't I see people who look like me in the Bible? Why, and I asked, and she would say, well, just don't ask questions.
Yeah, like my mom did.
And so that developed in me an inquisitive mind, and led to me asking questions that I wasn't supposed to know the answers to. And when I, as a college student here at Howard, would go home and have conversations with my grandmother about some of the things that I was learning, I realized that my grandmother was not prepared for the information, to receive the information that I learned. But because I loved my grandmother, I respected her and didn't try to move her beyond where she was, because she needed Christianity. She needed her belief in Jesus Christ in order to help her deal with life in Chicago in the 1960s. But what I know, based on studying history and science, is that the story of virgin births in many cultures is based on mythology. We're told that Jesus was born in a manger. We're told that 3 wise men came to visit him. They followed the star that was in the east. Now, this is based on astronomical phenomena, because around the time of December the 21st, we have the solstice, with the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year. And from December the 21st through December the 24th, literally the sun is still, the length of the day does not increase nor decrease significantly. So the sun is still. On December the 25th, that is when it was written in ancient text that the sun, the S-U-N, was born.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? I'll tell you reasons as far as not wanting to teach his grandma. Is there anything you want to mention about that clip that you heard and it stood out?
This all new information. So right now I'm just kind of listening to what he's saying. So it's all new information to me. So I don't have a lot of background on like historical events like the one he's talking about specifically. So I just think it's an interesting conversation, but I don't know if he has a different angle, like what Vulcan and what Dane are kind of saying, where he's actually a grifter or he may be trying to mislead people in biblical context. I don't know if that's his angle or not, but it's possible. I don't rule it out either way, but I'm just listening to what he has to say. It's interesting, if I can say anything about it.
Well, cool. So if you have anything, just, feel free to chime in when we go.
Okay. Definitely.
Going on, Dane, talk to me.
Man, look, out of the abundance of a man's heart, the mouth speaks. So if you pay attention to that, people will tell you things that, they may not intend to tell you. Like Vulcan was talking about earlier, about logic and proper thinking and critical thinking, make decisions. So this guy is being very intentional to present about his grandmother who needed Christianity. On the south side of Chicago in the 60s, his grandmother needed Christianity. That's a way for him and other pseudo-Christians and non-believers or shysters or whatever to smuggle in the claim that Christians are just ignorant, uneducated, emotionally, psychologically weak people who, quote unquote, need the Bible for a crutch. Okay, that is an ad hominem argument. Well, of course they believe that. They're those weak Christians. That's an ad hominem argument. Again, he hasn't made his argument. He's given a lot of very interesting information that may or may not be historically and archaeologically true. There's a whole bunch of things that are interesting stories that don't end up supporting your ultimate claim that you're making. And so that ad hominem argument that he gave about how he would go to church, his grandmother would take him to church, and he would ask questions that he wasn't supposed to be asking and they didn't have the answers to and stuff. It presents the church as some sort of nefarious, controlling, sort of malicious thing that just wants to control people so they come and they tithe. That's a common argument. And then to support that, he turned around and said that he just realized of his own accord, essentially, that his grandmother was just too weak to question it and too weak to accept whatever the truth is that he believes is true. It's just all an ad hominem argument, 100%, with big words.
Vulcan.
Yeah, so for me, I try to take notes as fast as he was talking. So what stands out to me the most is when he talks about his grandmother, as Dane pointed out. I think part of the issue is we don't have the best memory when these things take place. Anybody who has kids or been around people, had to manage people, what people think happened in the situation and what you might think happened is two different things. So he's thinking, I asked grandma questions and grandma told me don't ask questions. He might have been asking questions in the middle of the service. Yeah, grandma's not going to answer a question at that time. And he was a kid. A lot of times we don't think about stuff like that when we're kids. And so I think a part of it, I remember this one pastor, I think it was something Brown. He's a Hebrew scholar. He debates my favorite scholar, Dr. James White, from time to time about certain topics. And one thing he was talking about was he had his kids write down ways in which they could parent better or something like that when they were kids. And he says now they look at that stuff as adults and they laugh about it. Because the kid perspective on it is way different than a mature adult perspective on it. And so when he's saying that, because he's turning this boogeyman situation that you see happen a lot of times online, you're not allowed to ask questions. When you ask questions, they say God works in mysterious ways. The reality is this: I moved around a lot of different states. I went to a lot of different churches in the city, out of the city, all kinds of different places. Sometimes I would go to like 4 or 5 churches in a week at a certain extent when I was an adult. And one thing you learn is that most people aren't asking any real questions. People go there, they listen to the message, they go eat, and they go back home. That's what most people are doing. People aren't really asking questions like that. So there's no big conspiracy that, oh, you can't ask that question. Or I was kicked out. Even your Rock Newman say earlier, I asked the guy, the tourist guide, about the Black Madonna, and he, you know, again, maybe that's true in that situation. You just happen to get a crazy tour guide. He's just trying to get paid and go home. Why would he care if you look at the Black Madonna or not? If it's on display, why would he care if it's on display? So people, they have this doom and gloom story, or they got to make it mystical, and our mind does crazy things because we feel that. And of course, you're asking grandma. Now, no attacks on grandma. I've had two lovely grandmas. That's not who I would go to for theology. It's just not. They don't break down the science of mostly anything. They're helpful in a lot of ways in my life, but not when it comes to teaching me meticulous scientific things. And so, like, even saying go to grandma, that you pretty much going off the weak fruit, and then saying, well, they didn't really want to. I couldn't ask her questions, and because I respected her, I didn't want her to move forward. Now you're saying because you respected her, you didn't talk about whatever your belief systems were, whatever the case may be, because she needed Christianity. The reality is this: whether it's Sam Harris and a lot of these atheist guys that attack the church, or even a lot of these pagan spiritualists that attack the church, they don't have any institutions to provide. It's easy to tear something down that's already there. It's easy to poke the holes and things that are already established, but it's much harder to erect something that's going to do better. I heard this guy talking about it earlier today, is that when you watch Star Wars or you see certain movies, they always show the revolution. They always see people being, whatever people in power being toppled. What they don't show is the struggle afterwards. You see that with Moses taking people from Egypt and the complaining, and we had it way better over there. So the thing is, it's easy to tear down, but these Egyptologists or the atheists, whatever it is, they don't have institutions that can provide the ontological foundation that we need to have a reason to wake up in the morning. It's not about X's and O's. It's not about mathematics. It's not about all the science in the world and history. People go to spirituality for things that you can't put in a test tube. And that's how most people live their lives. Most people aren't intellectual. And so when this guy's talking about his grandma saying that out of respect, genuine love would try to give her truth. You don't hear Christians that follow the Bible go, well, I didn't tell them about the Bible or the Christianity because I respected them or I loved them. No, it's because you love them, you go and tell them, proselytizing. And so, like, even that's a backwards view. And I think at the end of the day, all he has is just, look what I saw in Egypt yesterday, grandma. That's not, nobody's gonna leave their church for that. That's nothing. That's not a community. That's not a tried and true system that's built civilizations, none of that kind of stuff. So I think that's part of it too. He said, why do I see people in the Bible that look like me? Again, this goes back to, are there good questions or bad questions? I would never tell a kid, don't ask any questions they may have. But if a kid were to ask me that question, I would say, why is that important to you? You see what I'm saying? That's a good question, pretty much no matter what comes out of somebody's mouth. Unless somebody says, I'm hungry, why is that important to you? Well, because I need sustenance to survive. But outside of things like that, we have a misplaced importance on certain questions. I would imagine, one, he says, why are the people looking? That guy's like 70 years old. I don't even think they had the Action Bible and all these fancy comic book Bibles at that time. How did he even know if they did or didn't look like them? How old was his kid? So a lot of this is doom and gloom and careful crafting of a narrative that doesn't really exist in the real world. Because why would a kid even say why nobody in the Bible looks like me or anything like that? What are you looking at? What video are you looking at? What picture are you looking at? That's an easy thing to figure out, whether sub-Saharan blacks, however you would want to word it, in the Bible at that time. That's not something that's going to be controversial to the extent to where you can't talk about it. You got to be hush hush about it. So again, I think that is he's playing to his base. Like, hey, look, we got this esoteric knowledge right here. We've got the special knowledge they don't want you to have. And he feeds that to them in a way that's inconspicuous to people who are unfamiliar with the terrain that he's operating out of. But those who can kind of see the sales technique involved, the Brian Tracyism of it all, you can look at it and see, like, why would you say it that way? You just talk about how much you love your grandma, and yet she's telling you can't learn about stuff, about how you look. That don't even sound like a grandma from Chicago. The people from Chicago, people that came right from Mississippi or something like that after slavery and stuff like that, they're escaping. These people are, very Afrocentric, generally speaking. Why would she try to suppress that? Doesn't make any sense. I think he's making it up. But even if it were true, that would just be an exception to the general rule. And I'll close that out on that. I think let me see. Was there anything else? Oh yeah, the 3 wise men. He brought up the 3 wise men thing. The Bible never mentions how many there were. This goes back to I mentioned the apple thing. You know, Adam ate the apple. It doesn't say apple. Now, I don't say that to be a snob or to say I know more, but I think most of the time, who cares? Sometimes when it does matter. And I think this is one of those times whenever you're trying to make these parallels with astrology and talk about the Magi or whatever you pronounce it and saying it's, 3, the Bible never says there was 3 gifts given. So people might assume, but it could have been, who knows how many Magi there were. And then when he talks about them borrowing from astrology, which is what he's insinuating, and I think he even says it at certain other points, the reality is this: what we have written in the Bible is that the Hebrews and the Christians were staunchly against paganism, whether it's astrology. You see Moses deleting people for worshiping the golden calf coming right out of Egypt. So you have this. The narrative says they hated false religion. The prescriptions say they hated false religions. The Romans talk about them hating false religions. The Babylonians, everybody that's observed these people realize they are very anti-outsider religions. They only like their religion. They believe in the one true God. So all the historical accounts say that. And then we have these armchair historians saying, no. They borrowed. They borrowed and just won't admit they borrowed. But everything in their documents said they hated, they despised it. They even got rid of people who wouldn't let it go. You know what I'm saying? They suffered major consequences for keeping those pagan ideas in their civilizations, even marrying women who were bringing it into their camp. It was strict penalties for stuff like that. And so you're saying that we're going to go get everything that we see written, all the documentation on them, and go by some obscure, who did what first story of how they borrowed. It doesn't make any sense. And I want the audience out there to think about that kind of thing. You're going to go with what you can clearly read and see historically and in the documents itself that these people held to. These people still live to this day. It's disputed whether you want to go with the Hebrew Israelites or you want to go with the Orthodox Jew. Whatever way direction you want to go, neither one of them like paganism. Neither one of them, you see them borrowing Egyptian stuff. So the same legacy that they had way back in the day, the same legacy you see now. They don't like it. They detest it.
Again, staying with Christianity still. Christians are governed by their code of conduct on this earthly plane, governed by the 10 Commandments.
Yes.
That the word of God, or that come from something called the Book of the Dead?
Well, I recall James Henry Breasted, who was a famous American Egyptologist at the University of Chicago, established the Oriental Institute in, I think around 1935. James Henry Breasted got in trouble for saying that the 10 Commandments were derived from the 42 admonitions of Ma'at. What does that mean? Ma'at in ancient Kemet was the overriding force that governed everything in the universe. She represented the principles of justice, balance, harmony, and that there were 42 admonitions of Ma'at. Some of them were, I have not stolen, I have not robbed, I have not defrauded offerings, I have not polluted myself, I have not polluted the land, I have not committed adultery, I have not spoken ill against God. And so it is from the 42 admonitions of Ma'at that Moses derived the 10 Commandments. And so there is a profound difference between an admonition of Ma'at, where one declares your innocence and says, I have not done X, Y, and Z, and a commandment where people without a profound understanding of Ma'at must be commanded not to do things that a person in their right mind would know not to do. So these are cultural differences that are based upon another culture appropriating aspects of African culture and interpreting it through their own cultural lens.
Yes.
The microphone check and get to the scholars. Deidre, am I pronouncing that right?
Deidre. Well,
Deidre.
When I met her, she introduced herself as Deidre, but her mother calls her Deirdre. And a few years ago, she started calling herself Deirdre. I usually just call her the help.
Okay. Deirdre. Okay, Deirdre. Oh, this is Uncle Tiger Sneeze says, Deirdre, hi there. I'm good to see you. Oh, okay. I'm here to watch it, but it works. Shout out to Dane. You got some people that want to.
Yeah. Uncle Tiger there, he's somebody that came over from Cooley Stream. That's where I met Tiger at.
Oh, nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so they have a conversation. He was asking what was going on. Shout out to I think she did a good stillman to Vulcan. Vulcan, unfortunately, sometimes people become adults and never question the error of things that as a child they critically view them critically viewed them from the eyes of a mature perspective. That was a good breakdown, Vulcan. All right. So let's go. So he's talking about the laws of mind. I want to get bring you in here, Dan. What you think about him saying that the 10 Commandments came from the 32 confessions of the mind? I got it wrong, but the laws of mind.
Right. Basically, that Moses plagiarized that from Egyptian religion and stuff like that. That's not a new argument at all.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my thing. It goes back to the whole astrology thing with the wise men as well. Scripture tells us the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows forth its handiwork. Everything in Scripture, from Genesis all the way to the maps, is God revealing himself to us in that Bible, okay? But if it's true that the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament, creation shows its handiwork, and you have a not God-connected group of people, pagans, like in this case, the Egyptians, right? They're also the descendants of Adam. So you see, they're trying to understand their reality, the world they live in, the way nature works. And if nature shows forth the glory of God and the firmament shows its handiwork, it would make sense that as intelligent people also created in the image and likeness of God, see, what that means is that we have image and likenesses of the characteristics of God. For instance, you can watch a horror movie in your living room. You might have the 45 on the nightstand or the end table beside the couch. But when the bad guy jumps out, you're going to jump, even though you know you're safe, because in your mind, you're in two places at once. Same thing with a good book, music. Let a song come on and your mind goes back to that high school dance. So you see, you're in two places at once. We can't be in two places at once without God, but we can have an image and likeness of it. We can't conceive of something that does not exist and cause it to exist. We're talking on a computer right now. The difference, the image and likeness part, is we have to create out of what already exists, and God creates out of nothing except himself. So if all of this is the truth, and those Egyptians, this idea that ancient people were somehow or another just drooling, rocking, window licking retards is absurd. Mm-hmm. So they were carrying God's image and likeness. They had that intelligence. They look at their nature. They may develop they built the pyramids. Come on, they couldn't have been dumb. So they developed this however many rules of modern, whatever, based on their experiences. That still does not follow that Moses didn't go up Mount Sinai, receive the tablets. The host of the show made a serious blunder, showed his lack of understanding of the faith when he said that the 10 Commandments were somehow the foundation of Christianity too. I'd like to point that out. You can defeat the 10 Commandments. That's not, you can defeat the whole law. And that doesn't, refute that Christ is, the Son of God and the Savior Messiah of the world, because it's what Christ came to do, was to fulfill that law, you see. But even if the rules of might will parallel map onto the 10 Commandments, it still doesn't follow that Moses actually plagiarized that from Egypt. He would have to show a logical chain to make the case there. He'd have to evidence that. And he hasn't done it. He's just creating a lot of illusion, a lot of innuendo and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really good points on that one. It's first, T-Region, you have anything you wanted to say? I know you said you're like taking a lot of this stuff in for the first time.
No, I like where the conversation is going. It sounds like what this guy is really good at doing is making connections where there may or may not be one. So he's using the error of not enough information being provided, and for us to be able to concisely say, okay, that's factual. He's just trying to allude to these are the things that I've come to know, and he's making these connections, but there's not enough proof to make that connection. You know what I mean? Just because the commandments somehow correlate to what Mott did doesn't take away from the commandments being in the Bible and being something that the Bible uses as a tool for Christians to follow. It doesn't discredit. He hasn't successfully done any discrediting. And I think that's what he's trying to do by sowing seeds of doubt. But I don't think he's actually discredited it to the point to where he's actually been able to prove anything of anything profound.
Yeah, I think he definitely hasn't done that. And the beautiful thing about his technique is you kind of don't want to do that per se. You know, in sales, we say something like, whose thoughts are they going to trust, theirs or yours? It's his job to say things that you fill in the blank with your own assumptions, and then you convince yourself that there's good reason to doubt it, or that it's likely that this, whatever he's saying occurred. And then those people are going to be like, well, I'll never be to know anyway, because most people are ignorant about how to even figure out whether he's right or he's wrong. He just sounds smart and he's older. So let's just go with it. Or we don't need to actually believe him. He just needs to be able to convince you that you be skeptical enough to where you can do what you want to do. People already have reasons why they might want to be skeptical. I remember this guy named Ray Comfort. He was on a college campus doing evangelism, and he was debating with this guy about, why the Bible's not true and all this kind of stuff. And then Ray Comfort asked him, he goes, "Hey, are you saying all this stuff because you want to sleep with your girlfriend?" And the guy just kind of pauses and goes, "Yeah, that's probably it." You know what I'm saying? But he knows that as a Christian, he shouldn't be fornicating, and the thing is, like, so, and that bothers you, especially the young man that, testosterone levels high, you've seen all these attractive girls around here, and you're like, everybody else is partaking, why can't I? And so somebody gives you a little bit of a doubt, a little morsel of doubt, like, hey, look, Satan gets into your ear, was like, was that really true? That's all you need. Like, okay, pull up at the crib. I got Netflix, let's chill. So, and I think a lot of that stuff happens. And so he doesn't need, the people he's going for aren't the people who are knowledgeable. It's people who already don't know and who are having to want to have their ears tickled. I think that's his primary target. And people who are, Black existentialists or Black first over everything else. So if they say, oh, this is the Black movement, I'm going with this. And I'll depart from, my faith, which I loosely held anyway, more traditionally than in actuality. Now, as far as the 42 admonitions of Mahat, I have had this conversation with people in the past. So I already know, like, again, these are loose parallels. And I'll say a little piece of actually where these parallels come from. I understand where these parallels come from, people trying to figure where the Hebrews were borrowing, who they were borrowing from. A lot of that came from Germany, is my understanding. A lot of the more liberal theologians in that area, they were anti-Semitic. So they were looking for roots for this that weren't Semitic. And so it was Egyptian, they were looking for all different kind of places to see where they getting these stories from, astrology, whatever it is, that's not linked to the Jews. And so that was part of what they were doing at the time. And so this is where you see this stuff start to the advent of it, and it's gotten to where it is now. Most of this stuff is circulated online. Most serious scholars don't even hold a lot of these beliefs because the connections are so weak. Excuse me. There's a really good debate on this topic that I always recommend. I haven't seen it in years, but Dan Barker and Dr. James White, they have a debate about was Jesus a myth, and it's like a 3.5-hour debate. But Dan Barker is going into detail about his claims that Jesus was borrowed from pagan mythologies, and pretty much at the end of the debate, he's admitting he doesn't really have any good reasons for saying that, other than it has to be true, because what else could it be? So that's one part. Now, getting to the 42 admonitions of Mahat, I don't know a lot about it, because again, part of this show is not to like drown y'all with a bunch of knowledge and history. If you're a good critical thinker, you don't have to study the details of everything, because it'll never end. You can chase a lie around the world. But the thing is, with this right here, the 42 admonitions of Mahat, I keep forgetting what it's called. That was something that was personal to people as they were dying. It was something that people would say that are already pretty much dead, that they're saying that people, whoever their religious practices are, that's them. That's why he's making a distinction between they're declaring, I have not done this, I have not done this, I have not done that, where the 10 Commandments say don't do that. Again, if you, without a context, you're like, oh, wow, that is better, right? No. These people are dead, pretty much making an appeal for their case to whoever the people that govern the dead is. So that's why they're saying to whoever they're talking to, I haven't done these things. The 10 Commandments for the people of Israel, that was their laws that they lived by, part of the laws that they lived by, their moral laws they lived by. So they had to live on earth that way. But the 42 admonitions of Mahat was something that people dealt with as they dead, and they're like Book of the Dead, or whatever it was called, that they had to have, for the afterlife. And so it's two completely different reasons they have it. And it's also no clear indication that it was borrowed. Our understanding of the Hebrews would be that they wouldn't even find that, they would find it pagan and detestable, because one, that's works based, right? I have not done this, I have not done that. A Christian would never think that way. A Hebrew would never think that way, because They have done all that stuff and more. And so you got the difference between polytheistic religions of Egypt, where they're works based, like 99.9999% of religions, which is you got to be good to get in, where the Bible says you'll never be good enough. Only God is good. So you're going to need someone to act on your behalf. And so for anybody who understands theology, that's kind of even still surface level theology, I would still say at that point. They would understand that that's not borrowing because it's antithetical to each other.
Okay. I remember the first time I heard this parallel, I think I was in a vegan spot, and they had the 42 laws of confession. I remember thinking, oh, that's what the commandments came from. And now that I'm thinking about what you're saying, I did investigate to see if this was a lifestyle practice. This is what I'm hearing from you as far as the 10 commandments, like this is how we're going to live our life versus versus them in front of a judge or whatever is governing the dead. I have not done these things. Can I enter to whatever's afterlife you have behind this life or after this life, basically?
Yeah,
so
complete difference in all kind of ways. And part of the reason we've been covering this is because, you know, I don't know if he prefers to be shared all the time, but he's talked about it before, is like, this is some things that he got exposed to at a young age.
Yeah.
I got exposed to it more on an apologetic level, but he got more enveloped in a lot of these things, and it did cause doubt and a change of faith at one point in his life. And so that's why I attacked this so vehemently and adamantly, because I've seen loved ones that get wrapped up in a lot of these thought processes based off shabby academic, studies that they've done, or at best, or just, hey, look, I went over there and saw this once, and so now I know this. And they just take advantage of the fact that we don't know the questions to ask, and we're already looking, some of us may be looking for a way out or be going through a mode of doubt. And so like that's why I think this is important to attack a lot of these belief systems.
And I was looking around, I was trying to find the book because I didn't have his book, and I watched them films. I'm the one that actually introduced us to the book. This is some of the videos I shared with him over the years, and him really what happened, this person testimony, we was debating and battling a lot of these concepts and these theories and historical events. And I told people this before, and just for the audience, I kept losing. And I was like, dang, man, I really don't know what I think I know. And the more I got exposed to these tools, what I call a format to help you get closer to the truth, I got a new set of mind. So, and then this is for the audience of people who have confusion on a lot of these things. This is what we do on the show to help me out over the years, because I really was confused.
We're talking about over the years. What you give them a little bit of a taste of what time span we're talking.
Well, we've been debating concepts for like 20 years, but 6 years I was really deep into Black existentialism. I wouldn't even say Egyptology, but just the concept, the worldview of Blackness. I definitely advocate for that. The worst times of my life. I regret it. I regret all.
And how recently has your liberation coming into knowledge with epistemology and critical thinking and logic? How recent has that been for you?
Really recent. 3 or 4 years now. 4 years when I became open to
40 years old. And that's my point is saying people can live their whole life with a lot of these lies if we're not careful.
Yeah.
And they will fight you for them. They will fight you for them.
And that's what he was doing. Me, it was fighting.
He was fighting me. I wasn't fighting him. He was cussing me out, getting mad at me, hanging up on me.
There we go. They're hanging
very militant.
Man, y'all don't do that no more, man. Man, y'all put that behind y'all or what?
He don't curse me out anymore, but
isn't it fun though, when you're talking about how you study stuff and you learn stuff and you enjoy learning stuff that you don't know? Isn't that almost a biological response of excitement when I used to tell my wife, because I didn't go to college until I was like 30 years old, right? So I'd already been married for like 10 or 11 years. We had all 5 of our children and went back to college. And so, I used to tell her, I called it my wow moments, where you'll be studying something, you're kind of skeptical, and then it all kind of clicks together and makes sense to you. It's really like an eye-opening, thrilling kind of situation when it clicks like that and it makes sense to you.
It makes sense, but it was so much that was going on during that time, because this was, I think I'm thankful for Vulcan, because he displayed a lot of patience with my militant. Militant just means just being denial of truth. Let's just and not
Yeah, just to
accept.
kind of give y'all the quote, that he said, like one of the last things I remember. This is back 2010. I don't remember the year, 9, whatever it was, maybe even earlier. He was like, I just can't believe that only white folks have the truth. And then that's when I realized, and in some sense, I had lost my friend. And that was the end of his journey, his short journey. He wasn't raised in a church at all. Like his introduction, I watched him first being introduced to the Bible. And I mean, he knew the Bible exists, but the church and stuff like that, I saw all that. And then I saw him go from that to like going to black churches and seeing a lot of poor theology and him getting exposed to more orthodox teachings and biblical understanding of, soteriology and stuff like that. And then him taking it to the black church in Augusta, Georgia, and then realizing they looking at him like he's a witch.
That's what they call it.
He got kicked out.
They didn't look at me. That's what they call me. Worshiper.
I never have been formally kicked out, but I have been encouraged or made comfortable enough that I finally said it's time to move on, because I wasn't raised. I tell people I was raised heathen. That's how I was raised. The first time I ever sat in church with my mother was when my oldest child, he's 34 now, when he was getting basically his little baby dedication thing, but my mother had been raised Methodist, so I was raised with the idea of who God was and the Christian moral code and that sort of stuff. But as far as going to church and being discipled in the truth or whatever, so I was going to point this out to you, like it sounds to me like a struggle and a fight to like pry your fingers from around your beliefs to be able to, get you on to what's better or whatever. Really though, that's the kind of people that I love see coming to the Lord. They didn't come to the Lord because of some emotional sermon about how God's going, solve your problems and heal your diseases, and you'll get to see Granny when you get to heaven and stuff like that. It's people that when they arrive at the truth, they arrived at the truth, and in the process discarded everything that they thought was true. It's like the people that I think Secret Service was actually created to fight counterfeiting, but they don't study the millions of different types of counterfeit to be able to catch a fake bill. They study the actual bill. And they learn it inside and out, every minutia of the bill, far beyond what we would discover. So that when they see the counterfeit, as good as it is, they should be able to say, no, that's not true. You see what I'm saying? But to get to that point, you have to, I would just much rather see people that want to fight me. If I'm trying to preach them, fight me, cuss me out. Just let's keep on fighting, and then, because if the person is genuinely, intellectually, honestly looking for the truth, well, then as long as they keep fighting to find the truth, they're going to eventually get to the truth, unless they come across some lie that they tie an emotional connection to. Now, if they tie an emotional connection, no, they might stay in that ditch. But if they stay intellectually, honestly searching out the truth, I mean, then they'll probably get there. And once they get there, you ain't gonna be able to drag them away from it.
Yeah, it was hard. It was a battle. It was a battle, an internal battle, and just accepting the idea, really understand that, because I see this in our culture. A lot of us do this. I know we got a time because I'm gonna get back to the video. We hear truth, and we have a cognitive bias. We just associate certain truths like, oh, that's white people stuff, that's European stuff, and we just automatically just shut it down and be suspicious of it without having a logical framework to go off to really judge if this is true or false. So we already have even suspicion. It just ruins your whole journey of truth, because you already.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think is really important that, he and I have discussed ad infinitum, I think, at this point, and I'm always echoing this to people, because we do live in a world now where it's like a virtue to be skeptical. And I'm not anti-skeptical, obviously. I'm a pretty skeptical person myself, probably more than most people probably. But the reality is I have a system, and I'm the most skeptical of myself. Like James, your biases, reference group bias, confirmation bias, negative, there's all these biases we can name and things we would like to be true for whatever the reason is. And I'm more want to protect myself against myself from myself. That's why I'm more so than Dane, more so than Enos or T. Reason or Dr. Anthony Browder. He's like, James, Vulcan, that's you're the one you got to watch the most.
Oh man,
and I think that gets lost in a lot of these conversations. It's like, look at them out there, they're doing this, and they don't want you to know this, and this nebulous, this, that that's out there. And it's like, hey, look, the main problem you've had in your life has been you. Like, did you read that right? Did you read that wrong? So sorry, go ahead, Enos.
All right, the comments before we get to the bill. Vulcan, yes, like a serpent asked Eve, did God really say?
That's right.
Shout out to Uncle Tiger. Coming through Christ through logic. You know what I was talking to a friend of ours, me and Vulcan had. I remember I used to be ashamed. I was like, man, it's like I had to learn logic and philosophical to really just accept the teachings of the Bible that this is true. I used to be embarrassed by that because I thought about the ancestors of people that, I'm in a predominantly Black city where they don't need a lot of that stuff just to believe. I had to go through this type of path to be like, oh man, this is true, so that's my 2 cents on that, a little small testimony to share with y'all. All right, here we go.
Lift ourselves up. So we have in Kemet the very first people who talked about a relationship with the unseen God. We have in Kemet the first temples that were built to acknowledge or to house the spirit of God, and a process, rituals, if you will, for strengthening that relationship. And so the people of Kemet established the oldest culture known to man. It was in their day what the United States is today, the most powerful nation on the planet. So people came to Kemet from all over the world. People came without a religion, studied the spiritual traditions in Kemet, and then left with a concept which they then introduced to their people, which became known to them as religion. But if you look at the origins of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you will see beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are rooted in ancient African spiritual traditions.
There you go. And I want to chime in on that. It's the same thing as far as the religions rooted in Egypt. I mean, as far as the Abrahamic faith. Dan, you got anything you want to say to that?
I mean, one question that pops in my mind whenever I hear someone that's making this argument and similar arguments is that they present it as if there's something particularly meritorious or virtuous or something about it having an African root, if that's true. Like, I'm trying to understand what his argument is when he keeps coming back and saying, these different religions and stuff have African roots. Then, I mean, my question is, okay, so what? Because if that's true, that doesn't affect anything I believe. It doesn't affect me at all, or it doesn't, change much of anything that I'm thinking. So I'm just wondering, what is it about him that he thinks makes things more valuable or less valuable if it has African roots or doesn't have African roots? And it's just, in my mind, I'm just thinking that it's sort of almost an ad hominem to say that the teachings of the Bible, for instance, they're not really true or they're not really valid or whatever because they borrowed from the the Egyptian religions, the African roots and stuff. So I'm just wondering what his goal is in that direction. But he just, again, he's making a bunch of open-ended claims. I would be really interested to see his sources that he uses to base that on, because saying this story is different than being able to support it. Because as I was saying before, with God being truth and the Egyptians being also in the image and likeness of God, I got into a back and forth. I think it was on Speakeasy a few weeks ago, maybe. I got into a back and forth about my claim that most all religions and religious traditions and what have little pieces and parts and fragments of the truth in it. If Jesus is omnipresent, Jesus is everywhere, then it's going to be little parts and pieces that different religions, will believe or say that will be true. The difference is that Christianity has the whole truth. They can have parts and pieces and impressions and imprints of God, but they don't have the fullness of God in the gospel. That's only in Christ and him crucified. So even if he could show that some of these things, parts and pieces of it, were practiced and believed by the Egyptians, that still doesn't prove what it seems to be his main motive, which is to somehow or another dispel, 8 to 10,000 years of Jewish and Christian history and scriptures, and the fact that there have been theologians during those times all the way up to today, far more intelligent than all of us, and probably him as well, that dedicated their whole life, to studying this. And somehow or another, they all got it wrong. But this dude, because his grandmama couldn't answer his questions, and his grandmama was just too weak to really, live without Christianity somehow or another. When you go after researching something and you already have a preconceived idea, and he's already told us that from a child, he really didn't accept anything in his churches as being true. So when you go to do your research and you're already biased in your mind that this probably isn't true or this is not going to make sense, it's very easy to do this eisegesis instead of doing actual exegesis. And like I was saying earlier, that's what I was talking about earlier when I said, I want to know what's true and I want to live in truth because I don't want to live in lie. If I come up to the truth and it contradicts what's in my head, well, then I got a decision to make. That's exegesis. If I'm going to the Bible or to study the history documents or whatever the case may be, and I've already got something in my head and he's told us he did, out of the abundance of a man's heart, the mouth gonna speak. He's already explained that church didn't make sense. I'm paraphrasing. Church didn't make sense to him. It didn't all connect, didn't add up. Nobody can answer his questions or satisfy him. And then he goes to research it, and he may find similarities in the belief systems and the cultures and that sort of stuff. So then he's found support for what he already believed. That's not the same as presenting an assertion and then an argument to defend that assertion. So I'd be glad to know what his primary sources were, even his secondary sources, whatever his research is.
Yeah, I'm still going to maintain that he just threw poor grandma under the bus. He did something wrong, woke up late or whatever. Grandma getting ready to put the belt to him, and he was like, "Why don't I see black people in the Bible or something like that?" And it's like, boy, it's like, yeah, you asked the question the wrong time, trying to get out of trouble. You did not.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, people use that, having people that look like you argument a lot. I experienced that really one time. I went to India about 18 years ago. I'm doing some pastoral training over there. And when we were in London, boarding the plane to go to Hyderabad, there were 4 white people in our group and 4 black people in our group. So guess who was in the front of the group boarding the plane? Me. Indians are short people, by the way. Okay. I look like Goliath. And, so I went on the door of the plane. And so they're all behind me, our team. And I turned right. And when I got there was this sea of Indians. And that for the first time in my life, I felt something that felt like what it was like to be surrounded by people. And there wasn't the first white person. There wasn't even the first black person that would look familiar, because that's my paradigm that I've lived for 54 years. Black people, white people, some Hispanics, every now and then a Middle Easterner and that kind of stuff. So and really for a minute there, it wasn't a negative feeling. I didn't feel unsafe or anything like that, but I was like, wow. So I could kind of in a way understand having a face look back at you that kind of looks like yours. But when people make that argument, when it comes to the Bible, what I like asking them is, if are the Bible characters and all that sort of stuff, which I don't know, I'm grown, my Bible don't have pictures in it. But if the Bible characters and stuff, if they all look like, black people from Africa, would you accept Christ as your Lord and Savior and repent of your sins? Nope. So that's what I think it would be. Nope. So that's what I like to ask. And what?
Yeah, and I want to add this little piece. Sorry, so I'll make this really short. I think also there's this inherent false assumption that people bring to the theological table. They think that, if you're represented in the Bible as the Hebrews or people that are great, then that means that gives you a sense of pride from a theological standpoint. But oftentimes God chose the weak or the foolish thing to confound the wise. We're not told that the Hebrews were chosen because they each had the best bloodline. There are people taller than them, more athletic than them, civilizations that were more advanced than them. So from a biblical standpoint, why God elects somebody for certain things could be reasons we would never know. Gideon's called a mighty valiant warrior, whatever the case may be. And so you shouldn't even, it's not even theologically meaningful to find your value genetically in the people in the Bible, because the Bible doesn't have flattering things to say about most of these people most of the time. Jesus called his own disciples evil. He says, if you've been evil, give good gifts to your children. That was people that was sleeping on his breast, his chest. And so my point is just saying, like, I think there's a misnomer for people who from the outside kind of spectating the Bible, going like, if I'm a Hebrew Israelite, I'm special and they're more special than everybody else. You could that branch could be grafted out and a different branch be grafted in. The Bible talks about how, Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh because he knew that God would forgive the Ninevites. And they're not mentioned as being Israelites. So my point is just saying, like, if you're trying to find your value from a Christian standpoint in your genetics, your history, your ancestry, whatever the case may be, then what you're attempting to do goes against the foundations of the scriptures, which it says, do not even deal with people who go on about genealogies. Paul said, he count his own lineage as dung. And so my point is just saying that that's the mindset. We don't get our value from, our physical. I'm not saying on a human level, if I could jump high, do I get value on the basketball court from stuff like that? But just generally speaking, my esteem, my value comes from the fact that I'm made in the image of God and that I have an opportunity to live a life that is laid out for me by my creator, which is the highest thing I can achieve. And I can be given God, which is the best gift you can be given. That's where you should find your value. That's where you should find your esteem. Not so, and somebody may have looked like you that probably would even enslaved you. And last thing I'll say about this Egypt thing, I don't know if we're going to get into it, on the next thing, is that people think that Egyptian was this egalitarian society where everybody thrived. If you weren't a noble, if you weren't a pharaoh, people walk around and say, oh, what up, king? What up, king? There's not that many kings in the land. You wouldn't want to live in a monarchy, especially as an American. You're too revolutionary. It wouldn't work. And so the thing is that we got to understand that even these Egyptian societies and their religions, those religions and their mythology was for the people that were in power. It wasn't for the everyday person most of the time. And go ahead.
And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That was in short. That was what I was going to say is like, so when you're seeing a lot of these myths and they're talking about dying and rising gods and all this kind of stuff, that was for the elite people.
Right. I've talked to my wife before about it and about how that, like you were saying, what up, king, and the whole, we were kings. And like I told her, I said, by that logic, I mean, Europe had monarchs too. Does that mean I'm a king and I'm descended from kings? No.
Yeah. Kings are scary people to be around.
Came out of the Nile Valley, came out of Egypt.
I've got people in my family who hit me across my head and say that everything about that you're talking about in ancient Egypt was paganism.
Well, all pagan means is someone whose belief is other than your own. So in that context, to a Christian, a Muslim is pagan. To a Jew, a Christian is pagan. And if we think about this in that larger context, the Jewish people were responsible for giving us the Torah, first 5 books of Moses, the Old Testament, and then the New Testament was built on that foundation. Well, no one really questions the fact that within the Jewish faith, they don't acknowledge Jesus as a Messiah. But no one questions them on that or challenges them on that because they are the chosen people. But what most people don't really understand is that the knowledge that is inherent within, much of the knowledge that is inherent within the Jewish tradition comes straight out of the Nile Valley. Sigmund Freud knew that in the book that was published shortly after his death, Moses and Monotheism. Sigmund Freud said that the origins of Judaism are Egyptian, that Moses was an Egyptian. And there are many other scholars who have advanced this work, and it's talked about in small quarters of the world, but it's information that hasn't made its way to the general public.
Something happened to me.
All right. You got anything you want to cover as far as the paganism? And nobody challenged Jews then? You want to?
Oh, me? Well, I don't know what rock he's been living on because people do challenge the Jews. I mean, this is why, especially when you deal with Catholicism and your high Protestant churches, there's historically been a lot of friction between Protestantism and the Jews, I mean, they're all sort of slander. I mean, anti-Semitism comes from somewhere. So if nobody ever questions the Jews, then why do we have this term anti-Semitism? So he just completely, I don't know, falling over in a hole somewhere on that one. And his talking about, well, to the Christian, the Muslims are pagan. Correct. They go to their Hajj and they march around this big black rock piece of an asteroid or whatever. Yeah, true. And to the Jew, the Christians are a pagan. Correct. I mean, that's not any revelation, but he's laying the groundwork to basically say that in that regard, there is no actual truth. You see, that gets into that my truth, your truth, the Muslim truth, the Christian truth, the Jewish truth, whatever. There is no real truth. And then, of course, I would ask him, well, is that claim actually true or not? You know, but that's what he's doing. It's just the more he talks, the more back in when I was a kid, there was a kids TV show, Rocky and Bullwinkle. I don't know if y'all familiar with that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And Bullwinkle would say, hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my house. And my hat, it'd be a lion and an elephant. That's what this guy is doing the more he talks. He's saying to the host, he's saying, look, Rocky, I guess, actually fits, doesn't it? Look, Rocky, I'm going to pull a rabbit out of my hat. And he's going to, all this wordplay and stuff. And he does it real soft in his voice and talking real fast and sounding real intelligent. The only thing that I think would make him even more believable would be if he had like a British accent or something like that, you know, that sounded very proper and educated.
I'll say I agree with you about the accent part. That probably would help it, but that Morgan Freeman, that deep, soulful black voice, that carries a long way too in people's minds. Like it just resonates. People like that's coming from Mother Earth right there.
Yeah,
so
They do
get that little advantage as well.
Yeah.
I wish I had that voice. I don't have that voice.
Did you know Morgan?
King, you know, that voice right there was.
Yeah. Or James.
What's your thoughts on it, Vulcan? And then he said he gave a definition of paganism. I want you to address that too. What's your thoughts?
I'll try to write this stuff down while he's talking. So, yeah, I mean, Dane already covered really well that no one questions the Jews from the beginning to the end in the Bible. The Jews were questioned. Jesus started off questioning the Jews. Matter of fact, most people he questioned were Jews. You know, so even from the foundation of Christianity, it's being questioned. Then the early converts are Christians. You know, and so like, you know, and it's hard not the Christians or early converts were the Jews or Hebrews, however you want to call it. So they've been questioned in the Old Testament, they're questioned all the time. You know, just coming out of Egypt, the ones that came out of Egypt didn't make it to the promised land. They got questioned to the point to where they didn't survive. You know, that's how serious it was. So if, you know, being God's chosen people, again, to contradict his point, that he's stating, and maybe he's insinuating at best, but at worst he's actually saying it in this whole video, is that somehow that, you know, this other culture wants to make themselves more special. They're the special people. In the Bible, the special people went through a lot. I mean, some people might even argue they'd rather not have been the special people. You know, they were the one entrusted with the covenants and the promises. They had strict things they had to go by. And my point is just saying, like, I think that he's having a surface level understanding of the historical context of it all. So he's like, oh, they're special. I wish I was a special group that it looked like me, instead of realizing like, man, they went through a lot. And, you know, a lot of times they got wiped out for the stuff that was going on, you know? And so that was the first part about the questioning the Jews part. The second part, well, I forgot what the second part he mentioned. What was it again? I can't remember. But, you know,
the thing about paganism,
paganism. Sorry, yeah, paganism. So there's two ways in which you can take paganism. I mean, there's lots of different ways, but the two main main ways I'm aware of is you could take paganism. One, as the guy mentioned, the paganism just means they believe something different than what you believe. That's one way, and it is used that way, generally speaking. But I think the more specific way that pagan is used to mean people who worship creation. And so any type of religions that are considered to be worshiping creation, like those Egyptian gods worship the sun. They had a fertility god. Same thing with the Vikings. Same things with Zoroastrianism and other types of religions. The Greeks, the Romans. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays are different gods. Thor, you know, all these different kind of things. And so these are the god of thunder. All us Marvel, you know, fanatics out there. That's all paganism. When Paul was in Areopagus and he was, you know, supposed to be chilling out, he gets provoked by all the idolatry around him. These people are worshiping these gods and you can understand at the time they would worship a god for harvest. They worship a god for rain, because if the harvest didn't come in, they didn't make it. They don't have HEBs and Kroger's and, whatever the other grocery stores around the world are called. So they lived and died by famine. That's how they ended up in Egypt in the first place. Was famine to avoid a famine. I think Joseph had favor with the Pharaoh. So this was very important. So you can see why somebody might want to worship these things, because so much of their sustenance is tied to the moon and the sun and the harvest and fertility and things of that nature. So you got to have that mindset. But that's why the Jews and the Christians came and said, no. That's creation. God is above and beyond all of that stuff. That's the foundation. That's the cornerstone of modern science. And so I think people got to understand that, whenever you're listening to a guy like this speak, you got to be thinking about what way is the word being used in this context. Pagan has a definitive meaning. Now, a lot of people call themselves Christians probably aren't aware of it now, but really had to do with the worship of creation, as opposed to the true religion being the worship of what transcends time, space, and matter, which is God.
Hold on for a minute, fellas.
Dr. Anthony Browder, you're on mute.
That's hilarious.
And the thing, Dane, what do you think of this?
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say this real quick. It's crazy because when I'm watching different kind of shows like this, whether it's Dr. Umar Johnson, whoever it is that's in the seat, being the intellectual, person, the interviewer, they just don't know enough to ask good questions. That's always my frustration with things like this.
Right. That's part of it. They're not educated usually. And I don't know this host, what his history or his content is, but typically they're not really educated enough about the particular subject to be able to really give some pushback and some challenge and kind of to drill down and ferret some things out from the guys, from the person's story. Plus on top of that, unless it's in a certain genre of broadcast or podcasting or whatever, like a blood sport debate type channel, if it's not in some sort of a position, or like Piers Morgan, some sort of format like that, and this doesn't look to be this looks more like just an interview, kind of like what happened maybe on Oprah Winfrey. If that's what that audience is looking for, I mean, that host has got bills to pay. He's got some sort of financial backers, whether it's advertising or what. So if that audience is not looking for that host to really challenge their positions and drill down in it, well, then he's I'm not saying that he doesn't really believe what he's saying, but he's got bills to pay and a show to run, and it's just not that format. I'd like to see this guy right here come on the Vulcan Soapbox panel and let's have a conversation. See, it's a little different thing.
All right, here we go, fellas.
Muhammad was even thought of.
So you say Imhotep?
Yes, Imhotep designed,
the first,
the construction of the first pyramid, a 190 foot high building, a 19-story skyscraper that is still standing in Africa today.
Still standing, and has anyone figured out how it was done yet?
We're not clear. We're not sure. Now we can begin to figure out how that structure was built, but it's the three main pyramids at Giza Plateau that has kept the world wondering. The Great Pyramid at Giza is the first and the oldest wonder of the seven wonders of the world, and the only one that's still remaining. And that has remained a mystery because it was built with a technology that modern man still does not know how to use or to replicate.
And if you would, let's explore for a second some of the fundamentals of that. There were stone blocks, right, weighing 20 tons.
There are 5 stone blocks in above what's known as the King's Chamber that weigh around 20 tons, more than a railroad locomotive. But the majority of the blocks, which comprise the main pyramid of,
so I'm not seeing this one.
are weigh on average.
Look, we're at 36 minutes on here, but I'm seeing it goes from 34 to 35 to 39.
Well, did we start at 35? That's my bad there. That was started at 34.
It's on 36 now, so.
That's what it wasn't. So let me see.
So you say Imhotep.
Yeah, this
Imhotep designed
The
and
first
oversaw the construction of the first pyramid.
Yeah.
This is for the
190
49.
foot high
Right.
building, a 19-story skyscraper.
Yeah, 49, 50, and
Karakoum's,
55. That's
uncle,
what's left.
Taharka,
All
is
right,
the
there we go.
no, Shabaka was his father. Karakoum's uncle Taharka is the only African king, only African pharaoh mentioned by name in the Bible. And the reason that is because Taharka, when he was the ruler of Kemet and Kush, ruled at that time the largest empire in the world, and he protected Jerusalem from the Assyrians. So that's why in the Jewish text, they acknowledge this African king who saved their nation.
Number 18, the slide. Father and daughter in burial chamber.
Do y'all want to address that as far as he said the only reason, I want to get Dane there, only reason they mentioned Takara because he protected the Jews. That's why he's the only one that's mentioned in the Bible. That's one time that we have. Save the Jews for the business. Dan, you gotta see Dan.
You're muted right now, Dan.
Dan still muted? Yeah.
All right, I'm sorry, y'all. I'm still a public school graduate, man, and I'm old. It's 12:30. So, but no, I mean, I really don't have a whole bunch more to say that I hadn't already said about the guy. Be honest with you, he's just continuing pulling, the surprises out of the hat, and it's just not connecting for me.
Right.
What like Vulcan was alluding to earlier, I would like to see the host kind of push back on him a little bit to try to drill down and whatever. I'm gonna do some research probably tomorrow and see if I can't learn some more about the guy. His background, his training, his education, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, my understanding his training is in graphic art design or something like that. But I think, and I covered this. I think you were stepped away for a little while. I was saying just because somebody's not trained in a certain way doesn't mean
Right.
that we can't take what they're saying seriously. But one thing I've noticed, people who weren't classically trained in a certain way, they're not aware. And they don't have to practice. They're not as scrutinized on the veracity of their discoveries. So
Right.
they don't know the process, the rigor that goes into peer review and
Right.
having theories tested and vetted of nature.
You know what? You see the good example of that is when you're seeing Weinstein on Joe Rogan cross-examine Terrence Howard. Because he's in that field and he was telling the language you use, they want to use the way you're using a certain math, the mathematicians, the language that we use, the way Terrence Howard was using it. He was like, they don't use those words in that context in my field. He was correcting them because he doesn't have to be judged according to the standard that people in his academic world would be judged by. That was
Right.
That's what I thought of when he was mentioning that Vulcan. He had to keep constantly correcting them, like, nah, that's not how you use that word. No, that's not how we look at this. Yeah, that's a point.
You have to be careful when you do, what I was just saying, when I was saying I was looking to see what his background was, and I'm going to, look to see what his educational training and everything was. It's not because I think that if he had a PhD in archaeology and history and that sort of stuff, I still wouldn't make his arguments correct. And if all he had was a high school diploma, that wouldn't make his arguments wrong. But I was just curious, looking in, as to kind of what his educational background is, because what I hear from a lot of people today when it comes to higher education is people will say that formal higher education is a waste because it costs so much money, which that is an issue. And there are pipe fitters and welders that are earning six figures, and there's people with master's degrees waiting tables, which is also true. But my counter to that is that an actual education is completely disconnected from what salary you can earn. That education is giving you the tools in your head to critically think and to process the information you're getting from your reality, and to, like you were saying about protecting yourself from your own your own failures and biases, where you can filter through that and make sure that you're considering it in a proper way instead of just, that makes me feel good. It answers some questions for me. It makes sense to me, and going with it. So that's what I was looking to see, just wondering if he had any formal education.
All right, Booker, you want anything else you got to say to stop before we go to the next one?
Yeah, I don't really remember, because I was still thinking about what Dane was saying. He brought up some really good points that have me thinking about something completely different. But I don't even remember what he said at this point. So unless you can remind me, I don't remember.
Oh, he was saying, well, I can't do the doctor like this, but go to my notes. As far as Taraka being the reason he's probably mentioned in the Bible is because
Okay. Yeah, this is that same, there's this, again, it's Gnosticism. There's this, not only the Gnostics, like in the Bible Gnostics they were dealing with, or, people in the early church. I mean, more in this secret knowledge, esoteric is what I want to say. Sorry. But yeah, it's really just the secret knowledge and that they're hiding from you. The Bible, everybody's, all working to keep you from knowing the blacks there in the Bible. And I think this is important because in Africa, they don't look at each other as, oh, we're all black. In Africa, they represent their tribe, their spiritualities, their customs, their people groups and stuff like that. And of course, people wage war in their own people groups. They dehumanize people that live next door, but they especially going to dehumanize somebody who lives on the other side of that imaginary boundary that's there that we create as humans. And so I think that, and I'm not going to say too much on it. I think he's going to cover this. We only got like 2 more clips that we're going over, and one of them I think covers this from what I'm seeing. But all of this is because him as a child wanted to know. He placed a special significance on his genealogy as a child, and he just can't let it go.
If I could interject something real quick, whatever, when you were talking about, him talking about the esoteric knowledge, if you kind of think about it, it's this format that he has, that the truth is here in Egypt, and this is the real historical record of what happened, and this is the truth, but the church kind of stole it, the Catholic Church, and then on the Protestants, which ends up European, which ends up white people. It's almost like he's trying to separate into 2 different groups here to say the people that stole this information from Egypt and created Christianity so that they could control you. If you really look at it, it's kind of got that Marxist kind of bend to it, that we have to separate into these groups, and then we need to find that bourgeoisie, that oppressor that's oppressing us, and then we can rise up against that oppressor. It almost seems like he's kind of hinting at that. I don't know if he's foundationally in his worldview Marxist or Marxist leaning, but it's kind of got that little bit of a format.
Mr. Tech.
Used to tell their political and cultural time of day. So if that's real, then what time is it for black folk? Black folk are in worse shape today than we were 50 years ago because we don't know our story. We have allowed others to tell us who we are. Dr. Clark also said that history is the compass where people find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells you who you were and where you were. History tells you who you are and where you are. But the most important role of history is to tell the people where they still must go and who they still must become. So my responsibility as a memory recovery specialist is to wake up those people who've been taught to believe that they were Negroes, that they were colored people, that they're black, and to begin to help them understand that you're African. You're descendants of the first people. You're descendants of the first people who created the first culture. And there's much that we can pass on to our children so that they would not see themselves as thugs, as dogs, as B's and H's, but see themselves as having made significant contributions that they have the capacity, the right now, to reincorporate into their life. They should know more about Imhotep than they know about Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Well, you got, unless you have anything, I know you say you don't have too much to say about this.
Yeah, I do though.
Oh,
I do. Yeah, several things he said here. One thing he said, that it's important that black children, black people understand that they're descendants from the original people, the first people. Well, if they're descendants from the first people, see, this is where logic dispels what I call woman poetry. If we can knit together words correctly to where they sound good and whatever, then it must be true. Logic dispels that. So if what he's saying is true, then I'm also descended from the first people. I mean, I'm also every human, but people like this guy, they say that kind of stuff, and it appeals to the warm, fuzzy emotional response. And so they say, yeah, well, that must be true, so because it made me feel good. I'm descended from the first peoples. Everybody's descended from the first people. So what's that mean? And when he talks about black people today are doing worse than they did 50 years ago, I would agree. But then when you get into the question of why is that the case, his claim, I don't even have a clue what a memory recovery or restoration or whatever specialist is. I don't even know what that is. That's like I think it's like these women that go around calling themselves life coaches. What is that? I'm a certified life coach. Maybe you're a certified.
Shambles. Mm-hmm.
So, it's like, well, I'm a memory recovery specialist, and he seems to be positing the claim that the way to address the issues that's coming to the Black community or been exacerbated in the last 50 years is to teach them about Hotep.
Yeah, I used to have that thinking that if you know more about your past, you won't look at yourself and maybe look at the current state that Black people are in as behind or slow. If you see that the stuff they accomplished in the past, I didn't go as far as Egypt, but I believe that in that concept at one time, it would maybe help your self-esteem,
Yeah,
confidence within yourself.
Yeah,
The history. You said,
No, I'm sorry. I mean, I can go on forever if y'all don't interrupt me. But, I'm just curious with him. I wonder what he does with the idea that prior to the Great Society, that Black women were married at a higher rate than white women. What happened to that? I wonder what he does with the shift in the last 80s from East Coast hip hop that was fun party music, shifting out to promoting ghetto gangster lifestyle. And then here we are in 2026, and so many people in this country think that NWA lifestyle is Black culture. That's what they look at. Oh, well, that's Black culture. But I mean, when I grew up now, hip hop.
I want to ask, because the far as the history part, and that's what a lot of historians say that's important. I just want to ask this question before I go to Vulcan. Do you think it's important for a culture to know their history, and why or why not?
If you would have asked me that question about 5 years or so ago, maybe a little less than that, I would have probably had a little bit of a different answer. My answer would have probably been that I don't necessarily see where it's that profoundly important. But I grew up with my mother and her people talking about being Irish and Scotch Irish. And I didn't know what Scotch Irish was, what that meant. It just, them talking. My grandfather, my mother's father, was 42 years old when she was born. He was born in 1901. So, it's really like a great grandfather age with my grandfather. And so a few years ago, just out of curiosity, I started kind of researching what it meant to be Scotch Irish. And so, to be honest with you, just learning so many things that I learned, I found out I used to think I was very originally unique. Have either one of y'all ever seen that movie, Undercover Brother?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What I learned was do what?
Said hot sauce on the watch.
Oh, yeah. Well, what I found out when I started studying who the Scotch Irish were and what their culture was, I found out that I'm a lot like the undercover brother of the Scotch Irish. And I mean, honestly, there's a certain amount of, pride and whatever, especially because it helps me understand what goes on in my head. You know what I'm saying? But so, I have a big appreciation for that, and it does make a little bit of a difference to me. It's not something I base my manhood on.
All right, let's get your book and say it makes just a little bit of difference. What's your thoughts on?
Yeah, I think saying that people need to know their history so they can be empowered and fight oppression and all that kind of stuff. It's speculation. One thing that one scholar has pointed out that I thought was pretty cool. He was like, when it comes to people that are making these sociological, stances and they build these great big edifices of whatever they've learned from history and archaeology and stuff, and then they want you to structure your whole entire life around it. A lot of that stuff is speculation. It's not like, he brings up, it's not like a chess player or a basketball player. You have a theory, you still got to go out there and perform it. You got to actually execute. If you're a salesperson, you can talk sales all day. You get a bunch of sales guys around, everybody's, swinging whatever. But in reality, at the end of the day, you got to go out there and communicate, and you got to bring in revenue, or people can be like, you don't have it. And I think when it comes to talking about social issues and how you empower people, there's not a lot of studies that defend what he's saying. There's some stuff out there. There's things that say that, if Black kids have Black teachers or something like that, they may do a little bit better and stuff like that. But it hasn't been, deeply explored. And it's not like it's, there's people are vetting that and cross-examining it at this point. So I think that it's still a very soft science. It's still something that people are not really sure of. I think that it's probably one of those things where there's probably like a list of 10 to 15 things that help people progress in the world. And maybe on the bottom tier of the top 15 things is maybe the top 12, 13th thing or whatever it is knowing something about, your ancestry. I mean, we know for medical purposes, it's good to know your ancestry. There's things in which it's good for how you ended up where you are. If you're in Chicago, to know that people migrated from a certain place up there. That's why grandmama cooks like that, or whatever it is in your history that helps you to understand certain things. That stuff can be helpful, but on a minimal level, if that predicted success that well, then you would see corporations, especially people in sales and stuff like that. They would have their black people in one and Indian people, and they would just go through history with them. Like, hey, look, don't you realize your ancestor did this, this, and this, and this? You can conquer the world. You got Tony Robbins and you got the guys who get paid millions of dollars to go and inspire billionaires and millionaires and the future leaders, thought leaders of tomorrow. How much of them are diving into your Scottish ancestry to empower you? So it's not something that's going to pay dividends in the moment, and we don't really know for sure what it pays out. It feels good at times, right? Anytime somebody talks about you, it feels good. Somebody saying your name, it feels good, right? So somebody telling you, you did this, but notice the rubber ruler here again. We're focusing on the things that we deem positive about people that look like us. So you're talking about Egypt, you're not talking about the human sacrifice. You're not talking about that. When you talk about Native American culture, that's about the human sacrifice. I was reading something about Hawaii and all this stuff going on with that. And then what they don't tell you, if that in the school textbook, is that they were sacrificing humans. They had prostitution in a lot of these places for spiritual purposes. You see that in the movie 300. My point is just saying, like, we don't focus on that part. So why are we taking the perceived good things from our ancestors? We don't take the perceived bad thing. Somebody had a really bad experience with an ancestor that passed away. They may not think so favorably. If anybody's seen that movie Hitch with Will Smith and Eva Mendes, remember he took her to Ellis Island or whatever the case may be and showed her grandfather's signature when he arrived in New York. Come to find out, he was the butcher of Cadiz or whatever. He was some type of horrible person, and it ruined the whole dating experience. Not everybody's experience with their ancestors is that great.
Yeah.
So using the ancestors is a thing. I mean, what if Cain slew Abel? What if your ancestors Cain? Do you feel so good about that? So we can pick and choose, and then we got some subjective of what morality we ascribe to that person. They were a good person, they were a bad person. We leave all of that nuance out in these conversations. It's just they're your ancestors, so now go out and be successful or whatever that's supposed to mean to you. But nobody's asking those deeper questions of what about the bad ancestors? Are ancestors only the people that were the good ones? From a Christian standpoint, no one is good. So, I'm not going to be too inspired by my ancestors. Now, if I could jump out the gym because my dad could jump out the gym, am I going to be happy about that? Yeah. I mean, there's genetic links to certain types of abilities, but that doesn't draw me closer to God. That doesn't make me more important to myself more than I thought I was before I found that information. And so I think one of the dangers of this, if you inspire people and motivate people with these historical facts or quote unquote historical facts that can change with the next archaeological find. 1 minute, Africa is the cradle of civilization. Now they're saying it might be China or it might be Australia. These things change over time. The oldest civilization was Egypt. Now they're saying it may be Babylon. And so all these things change. Now where does your pride go? Now, from a Christian standpoint, our pride is in being made in the image of God. It's in being, a follower of Christ and him dying on the cross for our sins. That's where we get our pride from. That can't be taken away. And so I would just say, I would just caution people who are looking as a kid or as an adult into the history of things to get their validation. You want validation from God. You don't want validation from somebody who you never met, who probably wouldn't even like you. I even see that I'm privileged to have my grandfather alive, my dad alive, and me, and then my kids. And my grandfather loved me to death, but he's not as close with me as he is with my dad. He's not as close, and he's definitely not as close with my kids as he is with his own kids. As the lines go down, you feel this is natural, feel less of a closeness the further you get down. And that's just people, we happen to have 4 generations alive at one time. Most people, if you talk, they don't even know who their great-grandparents' names was. They don't even know. Most people don't even know that information. My point is saying, so if they thought it was going to help them be a better person, they would found out. People are going about their lives, not caring about great-great-grandmother. And that's close. Imagine now trying to inspire somebody from 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 years ago. How far are we going to stretch this thing out? I mean, that's my question to y'all and anybody in the audience who might have, how far can we stretch this thing out? Does anybody know?
Yeah, I think you bring up some very valid points because, people, they want to talk about that sort of stuff as if, it's all going to be like we were kings kind of thing. Like all the ancestors are going to be kings. What if you're descended from Ted Bundy? That's a very good argument you had right there. What if that's the case? My natural father was a bandito. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but 1% motorcycle gang founded in Galveston, Texas, that kind of stuff. But, I think that it's good to know your at least some extent of your ancestral history and stuff. If you're just looking for information on how to better understand yourself and your thoughts, because different ethnicities of people tend to be turned to have different skill sets and abilities and stuff. Like I'm
like alcohol differently.
Yeah, I'm 25% Dutch, okay? 25% Dutch. One writer that I read who was writing about the Scotch Irish said, leisure to the Scotch Irish was a virtue. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that explains a lot. But then the other 25% of my head, so I got 75% that wants to sit on the porch, sip a little whiskey, play some music, watch the sun go down. And then I got 25% that's Dutch. They're the ones that found in New York City. They're all about business and entrepreneurship and, building, that sort of stuff. So it helps me to understand some of the bipolar sort of stuff in my mind sometimes, and I use that word bipolar figuratively. In my mind, it helps me to understand the things that go on in me. I think that's fantastic. But then to turn around and say, because of my ancestral background, I've got some sort of a pride over and above everyone else and that sort of thing. And you're founding your sense of self on it. Okay, what if you are descended from a king? What are you doing right now to live up for that? What are you doing as a person? Because being descended from good people, if that does happen to be the case, does not make you a good person.
That's a really good, profound point there, because that's another idea. You hear the saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the reality is this: if you were descendant of a king, you don't know. I mean, might consider Genghis Khan a king of sorts, but that don't mean he was a good guy. And so that's where we get into, the Bible says, don't count gain as godliness. And I'm not saying this is the exact context, but the general idea is just because somebody had resources doesn't mean it's somebody that you should want to be like. I think in our society now, people have mixed that up and go, oh, he was a king in the background. Well, like I said, if you were to meet a king, if Abraham was walking through Egypt with his wife, Sarah, he would say, tell him you're my sister. Because he already knew how kings act, how people act. They're going to try to take you from me. You see David do that in the Bible. The chosen people, David took a man's wife who was very beautiful. And a king, you couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
But David did that. He could do whatever he wants. So most of us Americans, we're very anti-establishment, which is why Romans 14 is kind of important for us to really understand and submit to the people, to those who are in authority. They don't wield the sword in vain, but it's kind of baked into our nationality to buck against authorities, right, wrong, or indifferent. And so when, so you got to take that into consideration. You're thinking about pharaohs of the past that they claim to be God. You know how, women don't like narcissists today, they think? You definitely wouldn't like the pharaoh of old. You wouldn't like him. He thinks he's God on this earth, or a God on this earth. He could take whatever you want. You could do nothing about it. And so I think people got to really maybe do a thought experiment and put themselves in that situation to realize I don't find comfort. If I found that all my ancestors were pharaohs, that doesn't make me think that I'm destined to be anything more greater, that I'm more favored by God at all. I'd be thinking in my head like, man, I hope I'm going to apologize for all the crazy stuff they did. That's what I probably would think.
Yeah, that's a whole nother subject to go down, isn't it? Having to apologize for the sins of your ancestors.
Yeah, for your ancestors.
But with Pharaoh, real quick, we were kings, we need to learn about Hotep or whatever. When the Pharaoh died, his slaves and servants were killed with him, so he would have attendants in the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't sound like a very good deal to me.
Yeah, that's 100% true. You see that, and not just over there, but it's around the world. That's the thing about this pagan thing again. A lot of these pagan religions had human sacrifice. I think the Aztecs were sacrificing, I think, like 2,500 people a year. Or we don't know the exact numbers, but some numbers estimated that high. And so when we're looking back and saying your answer, you came from these people, you're getting the flowery whitewash version of that. If you want to talk about whitewashing, you're getting the whitewash version of a lot of that historical content. They're taking out the secularists, are taking out the human sacrifice and the prostitution. They're taking all that stuff out. I forgot what it's called when they take your genitals and stuff like that to girls and stuff like that, and men, created eunuchs, castrating kings, castrating people, so there was no men in their kingdom that would sleep with their women. It was a brutal, ugly, element to history when you really think about it. And so, so even trying to encourage somebody by saying, hey, don't you know you come from this? If you really understood it, you as an American probably would not like it. And this is the last one we have right here.
With you.
Yes, sir.
You're going in 2015?
Yes, sir. I go every year.
When and how can folks join you?
Again, people can go to my website. We have information on our study tours to Egypt as well. We're doing a trip to Ethiopia. And brother, everything that I've said about Egypt in our conversation today, I can multiply by 10 regarding Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the mother of Egypt. So we'll be going to Ethiopia in November of this year. And there's details on that on our website.
Why did you choose Ethiopia? We've got 30 seconds.
Well, Ethiopia is the birthplace of humanity. That's where they found the oldest bones of human beings. Ethiopia is the birthplace of Christianity. It really is. And so I want to go to the places where we were born. I want to go to see the things that our ancestors did and then share that with those who are willing to listen. That's my responsibility as a memory recovery specialist.
Thank you so much for sharing with us here today.
All right, Dan.
Well, my podcast last night.
Recovery.
What was that?
Memory recovery specialist.
Yeah. My podcast last night touched a good bit on the whole feminine, masculine mind thing, because people sometimes they'll take, umbrage with me on it and they'll say, oh, well, you just don't like women. Doesn't have anything to do with XX chromosome necessarily. It's not limited to that, but it's the way that you process information and the way you understand it, the way you respond to it. And so, for instance, this guy was talking about, going to Ethiopia because it's the birthplace of Christianity. It's not uncommon, I'll say woman just to illustrate, it's not uncommon to be in an argument with a woman or feminized thinking man, and you're telling them what you think or feel or understand, and then they'll turn around and they'll try to tell you what the truth is about yourself. Like the gentleman I was debating with earlier, and he was trying to tell me what I really wanted, what I really thought, and what I really meant and stuff. That is the argumented format of a feminine mind. And so in this situation where he said Christianity started in Egypt, hang on a minute. 2,600 years, 2000 and, okay, here we are, 2026. I'm a public school graduate. 2026, 2026 years of Christianity. Well, 2023, whatever. Over 2,000 years of Christianity. And whatever that, again, scholars much smarter than this guy or me or either one of y'all studied this through. They've done the literary analysis on the scriptures, the archaeological studies, the historical analysis, the cultural critiques and everything. I mean, the Catholics had several councils to work this out, how we established the canon. But they were all wrong. And I know this borders on or may actually be an ad hominem argument, but this guy somehow or another has done his own independent studies, and he knows more than those theologians in over 2,000 years of Christian history. The Bible says X, but the Bible was wrong because he went and dug a hole in the ground in Egypt. And when he says, that's the cradle of humanity because the oldest bones were found there, that's another non sequitur. Pink elephants might exist, right? Flying pink elephants might exist. It's just we could search the whole world over And the pink elephants may be hiding behind the next clump of trees. And so we can't, but they might exist. This guy is saying humanity began in Ethiopia because that's where the oldest bones were found. Where did humanity begin the day before those bones were found? But we found them there, I assume. I'm granting his claim. We found them there, so now that's the cradle of humanity, but he has no idea, objectively speaking, whether or not there are more bones, older bones somewhere else, and if that would even prove that that was the cradle of humanity. But it's these claims that he rolls out again because he feels a positive emotional response to it, and he seems to have at least a group of a good many women around him that are happy to go to Egypt with him or Ethiopia, and they probably look to him as a sort of a academic pastor in a way.
Mhm.
And so so all of that adds up, seems to add up to him that this is solid, logical conclusions when it's really not. He's just making a bunch of claims and his conclusion doesn't follow.
Dude, I just came to that knowledge. One of the reasons why a lot of the bones that we find in Egypt and Ethiopia is because of the climate. So we don't really know if that's really the birthplace. We just know that historically, the way the dirt is, the climate, that's why we got the oldest bones. And a lot of the text that we got from the Bible came from, I believe it's Egypt or Ethiopia, because of climate, because of the paper.
It's so dry.
So we don't,
It's-
that's just, speaking.
A truly thoroughly educated man, whether it's a formal education or whether he's self-educated or some amalgamation thereof, but an actually educated man has been educated enough to concede that that he knows less than he thinks he knows. You see what I'm saying? That there's so much knowledge out there that I don't think you could study your whole life and live to be 100 years old and study enough knowledge that you need to know to say, I know enough. And if a man ever says to himself, I have arrived, I know enough, he truly is ignorant and stupid. Because that's what education does. Is if anything, it should be a humbling thing. As you learn things, and as you're going into your life day to day, you're like, man, I didn't even know this and I didn't even know that. And as you gather that information and it clicks something in your head and you say, oh, then that means I was wrong all these years. I believed it was true.
I want to be Vulcan in here, Dave. Go ahead. Go ahead, Vulcan.
Yeah, so I echo the similar sentiment to Dane on this. I think part of the purpose of this show is that I think people get caught up in the knowledge, they get caught up in studying and research. And now how we interact with the internet, who knows, we're already kind of cyborgs because our phones are always on us, but there's going to probably come a time where it's just like some Tony Stark type stuff, right out of your eye socket or something like that. And so the reality is we're going to have access to so much information. And what's lacking for a lot of us, especially in our culture, is critical thinking skills to decipher it all. And I think that what I want to encourage on this show, people that listen to this show and will listen to it in the future, is, like Dane said, you don't have to look at every single lie or chase every single rabbit trail somebody mentions. If you study the truth really well, then whenever you see it, a lie, you'll know it's a lie because you know the truth so well. And I think when you're listening to guys like this Anthony Browder guy, he's going to be able to dazzle you with information because he's been to Egypt 30 million times and been reading about it his entire life and makes a living off it. He's going to know some stuff about it. There's a quote that is attributed to Albert Einstein. He says that the problem with us scientists is we're such poor philosophers. And I think a lot of the issues with people who are these armchair academics, and even people who are actual academics, is just because you memorize information, which is the easier part to do, especially if you're naturally really smart, that doesn't mean you know how to put it together cohesively. That doesn't mean you know how to make it internally consistent. And I think that's the problem, is we get dazzled with brilliance. And I think that we've got to take a step back and ask better questions. In the book of Acts, from a Christian perspective, in the book of Acts, the Bereans are called the most noble of the Jews because they were searching to see if what Paul was saying was true. And so there is a moral imperative on us who are listening to people like Anthony Browder, listening to Enos, listening to Dan, listening to Vulcan, is that it's an immoral act. It's an ignoble act to just listen to people without vetting it, without searching for yourself to see if it's true. the man who presents his case first seems right until somebody else comes and cross-examines them. When I'm listening to these internet specialists and stuff like that communicate, one thing I go do is I'll look at what kind of debates has he been in. And I'm skeptical of anybody who hasn't done any type of debates that's claiming to have this knowledge that supersedes whatever we've all been, exposed to. Just like, on the block, you playing basketball, playing football, somebody's claiming they're the best. I got to see, has anybody vouched for this guy? Is this guy that good? And somebody vouching for him, that'll help out. But then eventually I need to be able to see, like, how great are you really? And I think if we got to apply that same mentality to people who are in this arena of talking about history or whatever this science is, who have you debated? Who's vetted your material? What's the test of falsifiability for what you're saying? And that's why I was saying with this, people interviewing these people, whether it's Dr. Umar Johnson, Tariq Nasheed, Dr. Anthony Browder, Dr. Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, whoever you want to name, whenever you're listening to these people, one thing that I would like to see from people who are moderating these conversations is just a little bit more epistemological astuteness, meaning that you don't have to be a subject matter expert like they are, but you can know how to ask the question of like, okay, so I know you're saying this right here, what is the best argument you've heard against that? Is this a part of the general consensus among people that study this specifically? Well, no, this is more fringe. This is not considered the general consensus, but I think the reason is, you'll see that on Joe Rogan podcast sometimes. Well, some guy talk about LiDAR and the new advancements and the new discoveries happening in the Amazon that is challenging conventional wisdom on the topic. That's honest. That's being honest. Like, hey, look, what I'm saying is not what the standard is right now. This is not the status quo. This is something that's a little more fringe, but I think in a couple of years with the access of technology we have now, that you're going to see more people start flipping to this worldview. So at least he's letting you know, like, hey, look, this is a little bit outside the consensus here. And I think that stuff is helpful to be more transparent with your audience so they can have a better grasp on what you're saying, because you can make it sound like it's the most normal thing and when it's really not. And I think that those of us in the audience that are watching people like this learn how to ask better questions. There's a quote that I heard, I forgot who it's attributed to. It says, judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. And so this guy has a lot of answers, but what kind of questions can you ask him to pull more out of this person? So
see how soon you could get him to the end of his talking points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then be able to turn around and say, well, you said A was true a few minutes ago, and now you're saying B, and you see what I'm saying? And looking for those contradictions, try to pull it out. But
he says, hey, the Jews borrowed from the Egyptians. Is it possible that they didn't borrow? That's all that's going to do is you're going to get more out of them on the topic. He may be like, well, no, it's possible. Now the audience has a firmer grasp because it seemed like you were saying it's for sure thing. Now you're admitting that you don't have the full knowledge on that yourself. You could be mistaken. You're making a guess. You're acting on faith. And for the audience out there, I always say faith, is what we would say the word confidence, confide, with faith. So when you hear faith, that's kind of an archaic word we only really use in a religious context for the most part today's time period. But when it was written in the Bible, that was how they spoke about that kind of a thing. It wasn't a religious word yet. And so I'm saying in the same way, when you think about the word faith, you think religiously, and it kind of blinds you and makes it more difficult for you to really take that word and apply it in the real world. But if you just use the word confidence, it's a close approximation of it. It just means you ascribe different levels of confidence to things based off of your available evidence. So I would just say the audience out there, when you think about having faith in something or somebody's challenging you or giving you information and you're about to give a certain level of confidence to it, that's you giving it a certain level of faith. So, Enos, we got anything else?
No, we can start to close the statements, man. So I thank Dane for coming on, unless you have anything.
Oh, me? No, I'm glad to be here. I could talk all night, be honest with you. I could talk till the sun comes up, When I was in school, that's the only thing I've really got in trouble for, well, till I got up in high school. But yeah, well, Dane will do his work and, give me no trouble, but he just won't shut up.
Okay. So yeah, you can start out with your closing statements and we close out. And then...
My closing statement?
Yeah, we'll start with you.
Well, I've enjoyed being here, and thanks for having me. And, I hate to see that T. Reason left, because I was going to try to reiterate to him that it's all about worldviews to me. I'm gonna borrow some script from Andrew Wilson, and I'm saying, it's all about trying to logically work through to the truth. I've been accused all of my adult life anyway, because I'm like my mama said my grandfather was. I'll argue with a light pole if it'll stand there long enough, and everything. So I've been accused before. Well, dang, you just think you're right about everything. And my answer is, of course I do. And you do too. Because if you're holding something in your mind as being true and you're basing your life and your perception, understanding on it, and you don't think it's right, that's insane. But that's used as an insult. Well, you just think you're right about everything. Of course I do. And you do too. And so if you truly want to know what truth is, then you'll engage with someone who challenges you, because if your truth is not accurate, it's out of focus, so it's completely wrong, you want that other person to engage with you and beat it out of you because you really want to know what is true. So that's what I do when I come in here. Some of the panels I've been on, Vulcan's been on the panels with me before, where I just get just out of pocket, just full-fledged redneck and the theatrics and animations and stuff. But I do enjoy being able to sit down and chill out a little bit and actually discuss the issues and, information without there being 8 other people on the panel who wants to jump in and yell over you and call you all sort of 4, 5, and 6 letter words and stuff, which again, Scotch Irish. So I can mix it with them, right? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. So I can get Roman on them. But I've enjoyed it. This last guy, I'm glad to see that y'all are basically hip to this dude sort of smoking mirrors type stuff that they're carrying on. I would like to engage with, wasn't his name T Reason or?
T Reason, yeah.
Yeah. I would like to engage with him more on that. I mean, maybe he could show me some stuff. Maybe I could show him some stuff. The barbershop I use, I don't call it a black barbershop because the person who referred me to my barber was a white guy. And I see other people on Facebook, it's in the mutual friends thing, that gets the haircut there too. I've been getting my haircut there 3 or 4, I think about 3 years. I ain't never seen another white guy there. But I know they exist, but they're like leprechauns or something, because I never see them, but they exist. But anyway, so I was in there a few weeks ago, and there was a guy in there. He's got a channel. His channel's name is Big Ward, and it's interesting. It's an interesting channel. But at any rate, he was in there. I'm 6'3", and I'm about 325 pounds. This dude was bigger than me. He had hands like a truck steering wheel. And he was sitting in the chair beside me. And I'm sure y'all been in the barbershop environment before. You get to go back and janking people and arguing with people and everything. And this guy was talking about segregation and integration and stuff. Well, my barber most of the barbers in here are real conservative leaning, And this guy is too, believe it or not. But they were having that debate back and forth. And this guy was talking about how civil rights and integration and stuff was important because it brought about, educational advances or whatever. And I asked him, at first I was curious, the first time I saw this dude, like I said, it's huge, And I asked him, I said, well, do you think that your grandparents had a better education, or do you think you and your children had a better education? Did they have a better one under segregation, or you and your children integration? He said, oh, definitely my grandparents. I said, well, then what good was integration? If you and your children get a less of an education, what benefit was it? And he said, well, it's equal protection under the law. That's what the system has taught the American people, that is the holy, chalice or whatever. We got to have equal protection under the law. That's the feminine mindset. The masculine mindset wants to know, is my adult son reading on more than a 3rd grade reading level? But, it really turned into a cool conversation, the question of, and I'm not a segregationist.
Hold up. We do it, close the stakes. I ain't be there.
Okay, that's cool, man. That's cool. Like
if you could wrap it up, that's cool.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just going to say, I don't want anybody to misunderstand and think I'm a segregationist. I'm not George Wallace, but I am about considering the structures that are in place, and is the system that we have right now actually benefiting like some people claim it was. And whatever. So I do appreciate that y'all open to that, and we can have open conversation. And I would like to engage with T Reason, kind of like I did with Big Warren during the barbershop.
And we could, I can send that text. I could let that. We could try to make that happen. But you know, a good show again. It was good to have Dana, especially somebody that you could tell that is submitted to the laws of logic and is really obedient to truth. So that was good to experience. Here we go back and forth with audio dialogue with T Reasons and all of us chiming and having a good dialogue. Yeah, just for myself, you know, what I do, this is for the audience. When you coming into this knowledge and want to get better at critical thinking, I try to find easiest ways for you to remember how to stay on task. And I was thinking of what I call the 4D thinking format. So you got the 4Ds. So whenever you're engaging, like you've seen us doing on the show, or you're watching other people going back and forth on the show or engaging in dialogues, or if you questioning the institutions that's in your head that you question and going back and forth, going back and forth, remember to try to define your terms first. That should be the beginning. Define your terms, clarify your terms, or even figure out what's being asserted. Then the second D is to discern, how to distinguish the truth before error. You know, like I said before, lies versus truth. Be able to discern the two. You know, to filter out all the noise, and then debate these ideas. I usually refer to yourself because, like I said, this show is a self-empowerment show. So yeah, debate the ideas that you have in your head first. Also, and whatever you're doing to empower yourself, it will come out, and you can use these tools to judge what you're seeing and what you're watching. So be able to debate those ideas, test these ideas through challenge. You know, like I said, over the years, Vulcan challenged me and other friends challenged me. So make sure you're doing being open to challenge, counter arguments, and what we do on the show, still manning yourself and still manning others that you're observing. And
that's why there's those who stated themselves seek their own desires. People that don't want to be challenged, people that don't want to bring their stuff to the public arena for scrutiny. It shows where their true ambitions are. They're building their own cult following, whether it's just them and their family, or they're trying to blow it up around the world. But you know, there's a selfishness that goes along with that. When you're unwilling to do that, Romans 12 commands Christians to be reasonable, be open to reason. You know, and so Christ, the logos, you know, or logic, you know, so like that's, you know, like I said, Jesus said, I am truth. So I think that's important for us to recognize. But go ahead. I was just, you know, piggybacking on what you were saying right there about the people that don't want to have their ideas vetted.
And I came with that. I actually faced that as a fork in the road when I was being challenged in a lot of these like William Lane Craig, these commonly held beliefs that I have in myself, that I hold dear to myself. And then when they got challenged, I was at this fork road. All right, should I continue? Although I know the stuff I believe is not true or reasonable, should I ignore you know, the hours of dialogue me and Vulcan had and just continue to act like I didn't hear this? Or do I have to decide? This is the last D, decide and reach, you know, a justified position. So that's why I want to encourage, we advocate that on the show. And like I said, self-empowerment, we're not asking people to come here just to listen to us talk. No, come here, get the tools, the research, be a better thinker, apply epistemology, and you can be able to judge and integrate the word yourself. And you can help yourself and those around you. This is one of the few shows that try to teach you to do what we're doing. And that's my closing statements.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody who's tuned into the show, I think it's a privilege to be exposed to it. And I think what separates us in the marketplace isn't that we're smarter than the people or more logical or something like that, but we do have an earnest desire to follow it, meaning that, you know, if Enos is being irrational, I may call him out on him being irrational. Maybe he's right, but he's being irrational, and vice versa. It's a commitment to it. And I watch a lot of shows where very, very intelligent, articulate men and women that are on the internet, and I watch them and I'm going in my head like, yeah, that guy, he cheated right there. He knew that he knew that was a fallacy, and he knew nobody else would know. And he did it because, you know, even, you know, I probably shouldn't even drop names, but even listening to people like the Godfather himself, Kevin Samuels, which unfortunately I got exposed to too late in the game. He was already passed away by the time I got exposed to him, you know, but, you know, when I was listening to this guy, he was very logical, very consistent, very entertaining. But every now and again, I'd be like, that's a fallacy. You know, you can't, and I hear that in myself and my own thoughts in my own head at times. I try my best not to say them out loud when I'm listening to people on these podcasts and shows and they're communicating. I'm like, that was fallacious. That's fallacious. Smart people, brilliant people, people with all kind of advanced degrees. And I just really realized, like, I mean, I get it. We're on the internet. We got to get clicks and stuff like that. And maybe this show won't grow as fast because of that. But I want it to be a platform where we have honest dialogue and you get called out for being fallacious. If you say Abraham Lincoln was born on this day and he wasn't, I don't care that much about that. My kids can Google. But if you're using a fallacious ways of reasoning, that to me is going to make me go, okay, like, hey, let's look at this again. Why are you saying that again? And how do you reconcile with this over here? Because that gives you an opportunity to learn and grow. And then your mind expands like, whoa, I just been challenged in a way I wasn't expecting. You know, we're not in there for cheap tricks. And, you know, what did I say 5 minutes ago? You don't remember. See? And it's like, that's his memory. He don't remember because he doesn't remember. It has nothing to do with whether or not he knew it at the time that he said what he said. And he knows not discuss all these cheap tricks all the time in conversations. We just took our phone conversations on the internet, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, but in closing, we appreciate y'all coming on the Vulcan Soapbox. We appreciate all the support y'all show us. Send your emails, your questions. You want to be a panelist on the show? We accept anybody, whether you agree, disagree. We're going to have the conversation. I want you to come at me with all you got. That's the only way for me to grow. That's the only way for the audience to grow as well. So thanks for tuning in to the Vulcan Soapbox.
We out.